Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the MHA What If with another fanfiction. This is the second part of What If Deku Was Sent to a Mental Institution? All credits for this video go to their respective authors, so please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. A school field trip was coming up quickly where they'd be visiting the USJ learning facility. It had many different simulations and scenarios in the medical and rescue military field, and to say the kids weren't looking forward to it would be a lie. They had been on their best behavior for the whole week so they wouldn't risk getting left behind on bad behavior with Mike. Even Izuku temporarily ceased flipping off All Might every time he saw him in order to go. Not that he stopped sneaking out to clean the beach. With Todoroki now on Izuku's case with the sneaking out, he had no choice but to try to bring Todoroki with him. It had taken a lot of begging to even let Izuku continue going to the beach, because in Todoroki's words, it was a fucking miracle a walking disaster like him had managed that long by himself. Izuku had pouted for the rest of the day to try and change his mind, not that it had worked. Although, so far Todoroki hadn't managed to make it past Aizawa either, instead proving a useful distraction for Izuku to be more unnoticeable. The consequences being a dreadful lecture every time Todoroki caught him alone. Finally the day came for the field trip. School felt excessively long for everyone, each second a minute, each minute an hour, each hour a year. When the final bell rang they were on the bus before it even finished ringing. They didn't hide their excitement on the bus drive there either. It was kind of refreshing for Izuku to watch their excitement over the trip. He found himself listening in to random conversations around him and relaxing. I can't believe it's finally time. What are you hoping to try, Bakugo? I want to try and incorporate some dancing into some cool moves. Help me out. Let's do this. Why the fuck are you fucking pestering me? Fuck off. Aizawa eventually got tired of all the loud noises and shut them up with one look. After that the bus ride was dead silent and peaceful. We're here. Aizawa was the only teacher with them at the moment, though they had been told to cope ahead for another helper that would meet them there. Filing out, everyone headed into the huge, towering building in front of them. It was the biggest building Shinso and Todoroki had ever seen, excluding abusive and illegal places. They had to admit it was quite impressive. Hi there kids. I'm 13, I'll be your helper for the day. A tall woman in a strange white astronaut suit introduced herself. She was beaming under her helmet, but no one could tell because of its reflective surface. They didn't like this strange lady. Aizawa sent the group a warning look as if knowing what they were thinking. A venomous look that spat, "Don't you fucking try shit?" Izuku let himself look around the building. There were clear different sections, a water area with a plot boat, a literally fire-filled area that Katsuki was clearly looking everywhere but, a frozen ice and snow-filled hill, and so much more. It was actually pretty fascinating. Alright, so we're going to be splitting into several groups to explore each location. I'm going to assign you randomly, so don't hold it against me. 13 gave a short laugh though she actually sounded nervous. Izuku wondered what the past experiences had done. Izuku ended up in a group with Tsuyu and Mina. Todoroki was by himself, due to reasons no one knew. Shinso, Kaminari, Jiro and Momo were in another group, Kirishima and Katsuki, and so on. Izuku wished he had Todoroki in his group. Todoroki felt a pang of jealousy before he could stop it. Shinso felt incredibly smug. Go on to your assigned sections, 13 instructed. Remember we'll be monitoring and watching you guys carefully. Izuku rolled his eyes but started after Mina and Tsuyu as Mina took the lead to the water area. Todoroki muttered something about creeps before leaving to his own area. Climbing onto the boat carefully, Izuku winced as the boat rocked. Tsuyu, on the other hand, had never looked happier. Izuku couldn't imagine that. He hoped he wouldn't fall in, 'cause after alts he couldn't swim. And then the screaming happened. Izuku wasn't sure where it came from first, because smoke and explosions were filling the air around them on every side. People were bursting into the facility from every direction. Some Izuku realized with horror he recognized, others brand new fresh meat, meant to be left behind. Useless pawns. Izuku, Tsuyu and Mina had nowhere to run. They had their own villains in the water in suits, and some guarding their only way out. But they were laughing. Mr. Aizawa! Mina yelled in fear, but in the distance they could faintly see him fighting off his own villains. He was outnumbered and definitely wouldn't be any help to any of them for the time being. The kids frightfully backed up as far as they could go before banging into the railing. Izuku almost screamed. They couldn't take him away. He had a mission now. He had to clean the beach for Eri. He couldn't let them take him. He would never go back. He'd die first. Taking inventory of his surroundings turned out useless, though he did see 13 fighting off different villains in the corner. She was losing, but Izuku didn't have time to worry about that yet. "All right, listen up," Izuku whispered, desperation and determination to keep the others alive taking over his will to stay silent. "On the count of 3, we jump. We need to swim to shore as soon as possible, and we're gonna have to go down swinging." Izuku forced down his oncoming panic. "Swing what?" Mina whispered back, forcing her surprise down. This was not the time. In response, Izuku broke off a piece of railing easily, handing one to Mina, one to Tsuyu, and grabbing one for himself. He took a deep breath. One. The villains inched closer, lightly smirking to themselves. "You can't hide from us, kiddos." The voice made Izuku want to gag, though he didn't recognize it. 2. "I'm telling you, come peacefully and we won't have any problems. It'll be easier for both of us." 3. Grabbing Tsuyu and Mina's hands, Izuku jumped the railing, plunging into the water. The villains on the boat stared in horror and shock, obviously not expecting their response. Izuku instantly brought down his railing on the head of a nearby diver, Tsuyu and Mina copying his actions. They started taking off towards the shore with effort, stopping to give a warning or aggressive swing towards a diver every now and then when one got too close. But when Tsuyu turned to check on Izuku, he wasn't there. Izuku was slowly sinking under the water while holding his breath tightly, thrashing as water started filling his nose. Tears would have pricked at his eyes had he not been underwater. Panic made it hard for Izuku to focus, nevertheless hold his breath. It was even more suffocating than the water, pressure forcing him downwards. It reminded him of his childhood. Tsuyu didn't waste a moment before diving for Izuku, carefully and cautiously wrapping her arms around him before kicking her way to the surface. He was a lot lighter than Tsuyu thought, so it ended up being pretty easy, but she had to drop her railing piece to do it, and in Izuku's panic at the water he had dropped his own too. Mina doubled back to start forcing the villains off on her own, kicking to desperately stay up while using her arms to swing the rail. Tsuyu started paddling as hard as she could towards the shore, Mina right behind still swinging the bar and kicking. Her head kept dipping underwater, causing her to splutter a bit, but for the most part she stayed above. Making it to the shore, the 3 collapsed against the ground gratefully, legs unable to hold Mina up. She literally fell into Tsuyu, knocking over the girl as she tried to help Izuku lay carefully down, instead just dropping him as she toppled over as well. Izuku was in pain but couldn't resist a small, choked and quick noise that might have been a laugh. Without a smile, it looked a little creepy. The panic was still there and making his head spin, black dots dancing in his vision, but Izuku had made it. Sure, with the help of friends, but he still made it. He sucked in deep breaths despite his wishes, unable to hold it off. Mina's legs felt like they were broken with how hard they were aching, and Tsuyu just felt plain exhausted. That's why they wouldn't have been able to run away either way when the shadows overcame their small shivering bodies. The 3 slowly started to look up, eyes widening in horror as a group of 4 villains stood above them with pleased smirks. "Boss is gonna be so happy with us." Izuku groaned and rolled over, still wheezing with barely any strength left, and flipped the villains off. Mina and Tsuyu tried to shakily stand only to collapse on top each other all over again. "Come on, Midoriya, let's get going." "Just kill the other 2, the tallest of the group ordered. Izuku decided to call him nuts. "You're not our boss," the second guy, who Izuku silently declared muffins for no reason in particular, spat back. Izuku gave a frustrated sigh and started to sign. "Fuck off. I'm tired, sore, hungry, and sleep-deprived. I am not someone to fuck with right now, and I don't have time for your bullshit. Does anyone understand sign?" The guy next to Muffins, maybe this guy would be Spinny, asked. So far he seemed the nicest of the group. It doesn't matter, dumbass. We're not here to talk to him, we're here to kidnap him. Muffins smacked Spinny in the back of the head. The fourth guy stayed silent, but Izuku got the feeling he was exasperated and would be the only one they really needed to worry about. He would be teeny. You do not want to play this game right now, Izuku venomously hissed, snapping the intruder's attention back to them. I'm not in the fucking mood. Nuts laughed. You can't even stand and you think you can stop us? Consider our job already done. Your friends are dead. You are kidnapped. Oh, shut the fuck up, Nuts. Mina and Tsuyu looked at Izuku in confusion, but he ignored them. You wanna play? I was laying down because I was fucking comfortable, not because I can't beat all your asses right now. Izuku paused and looked to the side in confusion. Comfortable? Comfatsable? Comfable? How the fuck is that said? You know what, comfy? I was fucking comfy. In truth, it was exactly the opposite. Izuku was sore, aching, tired, panicked, anxiety-ridden, and worried for Todoroki and Shinso, maybe Kaken too, but he hadn't decided yet, but he was ready to kick ass. So with a deep breath in, he forced himself to stand. Izuku lifted his hands threateningly. Let's get this over with. With a growl, Nuts threw himself at Izuku, going in for a swing which Izuku easily sidestepped, bringing his elbow down on top of Nuts, making him crash hard into the floor. A millisecond behind Nuts was Muffin, small knife in hand. If Izuku knew how to smirk, he would've. Muffin swung the knife at Izuku and he easily ducked back, bringing his fist up to punch Muffins in the face, only to last-minute stab his eye with his finger. Muffins gave a small high-pitched shriek and stopped in his tracks to bring his hand up to his eye. Izuku took the distraction to snatch the knife right out of his hand, jabbing it into his leg before Muffins could react. He twisted it, making Muffins scream in agony, before pulling it out and tossing it to Mina as Spiny approached the two. Teeny stood back, his smirk on display, calmly watching the fight. Mina took up the knife and with a scream swung it blindly at Spinny, making a long cut against his shoulder. Spinny snarled and landed a solid kick at Mina, sending her rolling. Izuku jumped on Spinny's back with his own snarl, flipping him backwards. Tsuyu cowered back as Mina forcibly and shakily crawled back towards her, shielding her with her body. Watch out! Mina shrieked, as Nuts swung at Izuku from behind. Izuku turned just in time to get smacked in the face, before having an arm wrapped around his throat. Izuku started elbowing the man in the stomach before stomping hard on the man's foot, easily breaking the small bones. Nuts loudly cursed and tears sprung to his eyes as he released Izuku, who took the chance to send a kick at his legs, making him crumple. Teeny finally made his own move, reaching into his pants to pull out a gun, making everyone freeze and time slow. He pointed it at Izuku, who in return narrowed his eyes and held his arms out welcomingly. Teeny glared in return and without leaving Izuku's stare, he changed directions and pointed it at Mina. That's enough, Teeny ordered. His voice was chilling and deep. Muffins took the chance to limp behind Teeny, only for him to shoot Muffins in the chest with one quick movement, and then it was back at Mina. The kids stared in shock. Muffin's eyes were wide as he gently pressed a hand to his chest. He pulled it back to see blood had soaked it before collapsing to the ground. He twitched once, twice, 3 times, then didn't move again. What the hell? Spinny hissed, putting pressure on his shoulder where it was dripping blood. He was on our side. He was useless, Teeny shrugged. Restrain them and grab Izuku. Then kill them. Izuku lifted his head, daring them to try it. Daring them to shoot him. He knew their orders. Nuts shifted forward, and Izuku held his hand out just in time to catch Nuts' own gun, snatching it and aiming it at him. If you move, I shoot? Nuts and Spinny froze, but Teeny only laughed. Go ahead, he's useless too if a child can beat him. Izuku took the gun and moved it down, shooting him in the foot. The scream that followed made Tsuyu shrink down even more and Mina winced. Then it was at Spinny, and 2 shots followed at his legs. He collapsed to the ground and Mina carefully crept away from him, pulling on Tsuyu to join her. Izuku turned it at Teeny to shoot, only for it to click, no shot coming out. It was empty. Izuku mentally cursed himself for not saving a bullet or checking how many were there, and as hard as he could he chucked the gun at Teeny. Not expecting it, It actually landed a solid smack against his face. Teeny froze in surprise before blood started trickling down his nose against his chin. Izuku took the chance to swing at him, sending a punch at his already broken nose, and Teeny grit his teeth in pain. Izuku wrapped his arms around Teeny's neck, copying Nut's previous move against him. Teeny started cussing as he turned and slammed Izuku against the wall. Izuku didn't let go. He kept slamming over and over and over. Izuku winced at each slam, and Mina and Tsuyu cried out and turned away with tears flashing in their eyes, squinting them tightly from fear. Blood was streaming down Izuku's face, but he didn't let go as Teeny started to slow, his slams getting weaker and weaker. Finally he slumped to the ground. Izuku didn't let go until he fell face forward, fully blacked out before finally stepping back to Mina and Tsuyu. The villains that were still alive stared in shock and didn't resist as Izuku carefully lifted Mina up, letting her lean against him carefully with Tsuyu on his other side, and started to limp away. They didn't so much as utter a word, helplessly watching as they slowly made their way to the entrance. Ida was frozen for only a second when the chaos started. He had gone to the bathroom only to come back to this. It didn't take a genius to know it was somehow all Izuku's fault, but it was a good thing the bathrooms were right next to her emergency exit. Slipping out was absolutely no problem, and Ida did what he did best. He ran. He had to get help. Katsuki and Kirishima were in a rocky-filled area, holes everywhere around them as they tried to navigate their way through when the villains appeared. Katsuki was having a stare-off with a black-haired one as Kirishima bumped his fists together, ready to fight. It wouldn't be either of their first radios. "You fucking sons of bitches better not try anything," Katsuki snarled, breaking the silence. There were 3 villains in all, one with black hair in the middle, one with glasses on the right, and another with a wrapped arm on the left. Did they really bring an injured guy to a fight? "Apologies, but we have orders to kill everyone," the one with glasses apologized, before they all swung forward towards the 2. Katsuki met them midway, pulling a tiny pocket knife out of his pocket. He never went anywhere without it. It was the only weapon he'd managed to successfully hide from Aizawa for so long. Katsuki swung it at the black-haired guy, dubbed Blackie, catching him easily in the neck. Katsuki stopped and took a minute to stare in confusion. "The fuck, can you even fight?" Blackie backed off instantly, tears and sobs filling the awkward silence. He slunk behind Glasses, who glared as he brought out his own giant knife and waved it at Katsuki intimidatingly. Kirishima slammed into the one with the injured arm, making him crumple backwards before falling right into one of the holes. He tried for a few minutes to get out, but it was too steep to get a good enough grip on the side, effectively trapping him. The 2 turned their attention to Glasses. Glasses ran at the 2 boys without wasting a second. "Give up now and we'll kill you quickly." "Not a fucking chance." Katsuki sent a kick at his stomach as Glasses sent a punch at Kirishima, catching him in the arm as he turned to dodge. Kirishima frowned and rubbed his arm as Katsuki pulled Glasses to the side. "Bro, not cool. Not manly at all." He sent his own punch to Glasses' face, instantly blackening his eye. A look of thoughtfulness crossed Katsuki's face for a moment before he reached out and plucked the glasses from his face, dropping them onto the ground and stepping on them with a satisfying crunch. Glasses, who no longer had glasses, froze. "Did you just step on my glasses?" he asked incredulously. "Yup." Katsuki smirked. "You little brats." Glasses reached into his pocket angrily, yanking out a small green item. Kirishima went to move forward to attack again, only for Katsuki to stop him with an arm out as he recognized the item with wide eyes. A grenade. Glasses held his hand over the pin threateningly, smiling viciously. "So here's how this is gonna go," he started, pacing towards the 2. "You're going to sit down where you stand, slowly, and maybe I'll let you live. We're going to wait here until it's time to leave, and again, maybe you'll both survive this." Katsuki glared, but cautiously sat down, pulling a wide-eyed Kirishima with him. "What do you want?" Katsuki spat. Glasses sent him a glare, but shrugged. "We're here for boss's kid." Kirishima frowned. "Who's that?" "Midoriya something. We got a picture. Only a few know his name." He waved his hand carelessly. "And I know when we get back he's getting his ass beat." Something about an obstacle course and getting another collar. Katsuki and Kirishima shivered almost at the same time. It felt a lot colder all of a sudden. Deku-dash. Izuku. They muttered at the same time. Yeah, something like that. I heard they're upping his training too. Blackie slowly slunk forward. We shouldn't be telling them this, he nervously stuttered. Oh, shut up. Glasses glared at him with annoyance. I'll tell them what I want. So sorry. What a wimp, Katsuki couldn't help but snort. Eri was trapped. This time against some building on the side, a fast food place of something. She had assumed there was a fence that she could climb. She was wrong. Now, Nijire, Tamaki, and Mirio had cornered her. Please. Just leave me alone. Look, we want to help you. No one's going to hurt you, Mirio gently soothed. Help me how? All you want to do is send me back. I know my parents sent you. Eri glared at them with all she could. Go away. Tears pricked at her eyes before she could stop them. We want to make sure you're safe, Nijire tried. We're police in training. We are only here to help. To prove their point, Mirio slowly started to sit down, Nijire and Tamaki following his lead cautiously. Eri looked on in confusion as Mirio nodded at her encouragingly. She hesitated before sitting across from them crisscrossed, making sure to leave good distance between them. Momo, Jiro, Shinso, and Denki were stuck behind some mountains, unable to see anything as they were forced to listen to the explosions. They had hidden behind some fake rocks as the screaming started and a group of 6 villains approached their area. They were spotted right away. Come out and sit against the rocks, one ordered. If you do that you might get out of this alive. We just want information. Shinso was the first to move, carefully creeping out and leading the way for Denki and Jiro, Denki clinging to his hand fearfully. Momo remained behind the rock, eyes clenched tightly shut. She recognized those voices. He said get out. Another of the villains stalked towards Momo, but Shinso quickly stood, blocking him off with a snarl. The two stood each other off for a moment before Momo spoke up. I'm coming. Please don't. Her voice trembled and broke as tears pricked at her eyes. Stepping out, she joined the others against the rock, coaxing Shinso to sit back down as well. The villains went back to talking, except one who was staring at Momo. She felt his gaze and turned her head, Shinso noticing too and slowly climbing in front of her to glare at the villain. Wait, the villain ordered, just as the others were about to leave. We know that girl. Recognize her? The villains stared at Momo for a minute before shaking their heads. No clue. Just tell us already. The villain rolled his eyes. She was that rich girl we kidnapped a while back. Few years ago, I think. Boss would be really happy to have her back. Momo froze and started to suck in breaths as her airway tightened. The room started to spin. No. Jiro was pushed out of the way as villain 1 stalked forward. Shinso jumped up and swung at him, which the villain instantly blocked. The other villains looked at each other before shrugging and closing in on the kids. Denki jumped up besides Shinso, jumping at the closest villain and biting hard into his arm, making him yell in surprise, and slammed Denki against a fake rock. Shinso narrowed his eyes and swung a fake rock he had picked up at the villain's head. Todoroki causally walked through his icy-filled terrain. The villains he had encountered had put up a pathetic fight and were now tied up behind him. His thoughts were on one thing: Izuku. Ripping off their fingernails had been enough motivation for them to spill about their mission, and now Todoroki was determined to get to him first. He had to protect him, though he was sure Izuku was doing fine on his own. Spotting the exit to his area, he took off at a run before freezing. He didn't know which section Izuku was in. Todoroki wasn't so silent with his curses when a loud explosion sounded from across the building. Fucking dash! Todoroki changed his direction and started heading that way. Knowing Izuku, it was probably his fault. Katsuki and Kirishima dove for cover just in time as the grenade exploded. Glasses had started carelessly tossing the grenade up when the pin fell off. That fucking idiot! When the smoke cleared, Katsuki and Kirishima crept out from behind the rock. They only had small scratches from the flying debris, Kirishima getting the worst of it with a slice across the cheek. Glasses and Blackie were gone. With a little bit of looking, the two had been knocked back into their own hole, though they looked like they were barely breathing. Glasses was missing his leg. Blackie didn't have half his torso. Blood was everywhere. Katsuki felt sick and forced Kirishima away before he could see. The two headed towards the final, mostly uninjured villain. Dude. What happened? He shouted as soon as they came into view. They're fucking idiots is what happened. Katsuki snarled, not stopping as they walked past. Dude frowned as they started to leave. Wait. If you come back, I'll tell you what you want to know. Just get me out of here. Katsuki froze and Kirishima shook his head. Don't do it, it's not worth it. Katsuki still didn't move as he hesitated before turning back to the villain. Fine. Phil. I want to know everything you know about Dex Midoriya. All I know is he's the boss's kid and the League's secret weapon. They keep him obedient with a little girl, and that's all I know. I had permission to beat the little girl if he misbehaved, but he never did. Now please, get me out of here. His words turned into a blubber as he started to cry. Katsuki realized his leg was facing the wrong direction. He turned away again. Nausea coming back. Let's go. Kirishima nodded, following Katsuki without so much as a glance at the wailing villain as they slunk away. They had to find the others. Kirishima had to find Mina. Eri was clinging to Mirio as they walked down the street, Nijire and Tamaki right behind them. Mirio knew Izuku, and he had proved it. He told her about the visitations that lined up with her own timeline of when Izuku was gone. He knew what he looked like and where he lived. She still didn't trust his friends, but he knew Izuku and that was enough for her. Eri had hesitantly explained her story to him. Mirio had been patient with her as she cried and explained his own side of the story to her. Now they were headed to a shared apartment to get food and fresh clothes as she sniffled. And then we find Aizu? Eri nervously checked for the 100th time. Of course, then we find Izuku, Mirio reassured. He answered her every question, no matter how many details she demanded or time she asked. She was scared and they knew it. Nijire couldn't stop cooing over Eri while Tamaki just quietly stood there. Eri kind of liked Tamaki. He hadn't talked much and gave off a calming though anxious aura. It didn't keep Eri from being tense. She always had to keep one eye open, though she was really tired, and Mirio was really comfy. The bouncing motion felt soothing, and Eri's eyes were heavy. Maybe closing them for a minute wasn't too bad an idea? Momo could only watch in horror as Shinso, Denki, and Jiro fought the villains. Her body wouldn't respond, making her completely vulnerable and helpless. She couldn't move. Tears streamed down her face, but Momo dared not mutter a sound. Her vision was going blurry though she tried to fight it. Shinso knocked out the first villain easily, and a second though that one had put up more a fight. Denki was fighting a lanky guy, while Jiro tussled with a suspiciously high-looking dude, leaving a girl and blonde dude that Shinso was wrestling with. Shinso successfully knocked the girl down and brought his foot down on her leg, snapping it in two. He kicked her in the face multiple times, bloodying it instantly. He kept going until she stopped moving and only her ragged breaths could be heard. He swung at Blondie, elbowing him in the side of the face as his head snapped to the side. Maybe a little too harshly cause he collapsed too with a groan. Jiro was doing well with her opponent, swing after swing after swing, until he held his hands up in defeat and started to beg. Jiro tied him up with some ropes that the villains had brought with him, making sure to do his hands tightly enough to sting. Shinso turned towards Denki and took off towards them. The villain stood above Denki, who was laying unconscious on the ground, bruise around his neck. Shinso swung his fake rock at the villain, and that sucker wasn't light either. The villain went out immediately, but that didn't stop Shinso from hitting him with it again and again and again. Blood splattered onto his arm, but red filled his vision. Two arms yanked Shinso off of him finally, and Shinso glared at Jiro as she shook her head. "He's done," she muttered soothingly. "Denki's safe." Shinso pushed Momo gently off of him and went to Denki's side, picking him up bridal style with an apologetic nod at Jiro. "Let's go." Izuku stood face to face with Kurojiri as he held a gun to his head. They were the only things that had been waiting at the entrance. Next to him stood Shigaraki, scratching at his neck with his hands. "You can stop this, Izuku," Kurojiri announced. You know what must be done. Mina and Tsuyu were a few feet behind him, hidden behind some fake rocks as they were forced to listen helplessly to the one-sided conversation, unable to move. I have something to do and then I'm gone, Izuku signed, glaring at the two. I'm never going back. What can possibly be so important you feel the need to disobey? Kurojairi wondered aloud. You were being so good up till now too? Fuck. Off. Izuku signed this slowly, making sure to make each word extra clear. Look, Hisashi promised you another girl already. What more do you want? Shigaraki interrupted with an annoyed hiss. I want her back. There isn't another girl in the world who can replace her. Izuku's voice shocked Mina and Tsuyu, making them wince. It also stole Aizawa's attention for a minute from behind them, allowing a villain to land a solid hit against him, forcing his attention back. Aizawa doubled his efforts. He had to protect his kids. That's enough. Then, Izuku tensed up and froze as the hulking male slunk next to Shigaraki. And of course, it was at that moment Todoroki, Kirishima, Katsuki, and Shinso's group appeared at the exact same time. They had been headed to the entrance after meeting up as well before following the yelling. Get back! Izuku yelled, even as his breathing became harsh and the fear paralyzed his legs. It was gone in a second. Shigaraki's lips twitched into a smile. Nomu. Kill them all. Bring Izuku to me. Izuku jumped towards Nomu, blocking the way to the others with his fists up. A chuckle escaped Shigaraki. Did our little Izuku make some friends? How cute. Too bad they won't last very long. Nomu, I want Izuku unconscious. Nomu flung a fist towards Izuku at the order that he jumped back. Except Nomu kept going, forcing Izuku to keep dodging backwards until he hit a wall. He didn't have time to duck before a solid punch landed on the side of his face, smacking him sideways. Todoroki went to go forward and help but was stopped by more villains that were surrounding the group, ripping his attention from Izuku's fight. Izuku sent a kick at Nomu that made him take a few steps back, releasing Izuku from his trap. Izuku dodged Nomu's kick and raced forward to give himself more room. A sharp kick sent Izuku flying into a large fake rock. Izuku started coughing and blood trickled down his jaw. The skin on his cheek had been ripped and stung as if it was on fire. Nomu slowly approached Izuku as he remained on the ground, crumpled only for him to last second roll away, so Nomu's fist slammed into the ground. He bit back a curse and jumped up, dodging the next round of kicks and punches. Nomu left an opening at his leg as he raised his fist again, and Izuku went to take the shot when Nomu's other hand reached out and yanked Izuku by the neck, lifting him upwards while blocking off his breathing even more so than the panic was already doing. Instead of continuing until Izuku was unconscious, he dropped him before taking hold of his leg, and in one quick movement with Izuku's wide eyes staring up at him, he snapped his leg in two. The scream that followed made the whole clearing freeze and snapped everyone's attention towards their fight. Izuku limped backwards, desperately crumpled on the ground while Nomu stalked forward, keeping Izuku straight in front of him as Izuku wailed in pain. Shut up! Shigaraki spat. That's fucking annoying. Izuku forced his sobs down, letting out only strangled moans of pain. It wasn't for Shigaraki though, it was for his friends. The villains took the advantage of their shocked and horrified friends to grab them, and Kurojairi swung his gun towards Mina and Tsuyu, who had climbed out of their hiding spot in the chaos and were paralyzed with wide eyes. Izuku stopped moving backwards as he noticed their new situation. His voice shook dangerously. Stop. I give up, I'll come with you. He couldn't stop the tears now as they dripped down his face. Just let them go. Promise me they won't die. Give me your word. Kurojairi turned towards Shigaraki, waiting for his orders. Shigaraki pretended to think about it before widening his eyes creepily and giving Izuku the biggest grin he could. The bastard. No. Time froze and the word hung in the air for a minute before Izuku snapped back to his sense. What? He didn't even hear his own mouth say the words. Shigaraki giggled. You're outnumbered. You've been misbehaving. I am winning. Why would I stop now? And this way, you won't have anyone to go running back to should you ever try and escape again. Shigaraki leaned back carelessly. They're all going to die. Nomu, bring me Izuku. Nomu lifted Izuku princess style before he could fight back, dropping him in front of Shigaraki. Izuku groaned as his leg got shifted. Shigaraki leaned down to Izuku's level. "You're coming back with us whether you like it or not. And you are going to watch as every single one of your friends?" He paused for the effect. "That is... Eri." Izuku didn't hold back his wail of anguish this time. Choked sobs made his way to his throat, suffocating him. Izuku pushed himself into a small ball, ignoring the fire in his leg, and started to rock back and forth with his hands covering his ears and eyes clenched shut as tightly as they could be. He didn't hear the crashing as the door was shot down. He didn't hear the cussing from Shigaraki or the order to retreat. He did hear the gunshots, but only sunk deeper into himself, thinking the victims to be his friends. A hand landed on Izuku's shoulder. But it wasn't Shigaraki's. It was cold and soothing. Todoroki? Izuku cautiously lifted his face in confusion and his eyes widened as they met Todoroki's mismatched ones. Before he could stop himself, he flung his arms around Todoroki, squeezing tightly and refusing to let go despite the agony his leg was in. Everyone could only stare at the scene. Police were all around them now, handcuffing villains and wrapping the kids in blankets, examining them for injuries. Izuku's were the worst, but Todoroki refused to let go until he was forcibly peeled off by Aizawa and Mike. Izuku was rushed to a hospital, everyone else set to go with a few bandages. Aizawa went with Izuku, and after threats and begging, Todoroki had it be restrained by Mike, leaving All Might, Midnight and an injured 13 to soothe the rest of the kids. This would be a long night. Eri sat on Mirio's couch. It had been a few weeks since she'd been at his apartment as he started his search on Izuku. At the moment he was making Eri some soba to eat and it was just the two of them. "Eri, I got something for you," Mirio hesitantly started, passing her a box as they sat down to eat. Eri looked at him curiously before slowly opening the box. She'd never gotten a present from anyone other than Izuku before. Wasn't it a sibling thing? Mirio wasn't her sibling? Inside were a pair of pink things she had seen on other people's feet, including Izuku's. What is it?" Her soft voice wondered. Mirio looked at her sadly. "Want me to help you put them on?" Eri was suspicious. "What do? "They protect your feet so you can run around without getting hurt," Mirio explained. "But running is supposed to hurt?" "No, running is not supposed to hurt. You're supposed to wear shoes." "How do shoes keep running from hurting?" Eri asked, still suspicious. "Well, they have pads at the bottom so it's kind of like walking on a pillow, but you're still running," Mirio tried. Eri had learned there were different types of pillows earlier that week when Mirio had given her a personal, very fluffy one. Much better than her firm, uncomfortable ones at home. With the help of Mirio, Eri slid the shoes on. They fit perfectly. Mirio gave Eri his hand while she stood up and instantly started to wobble. "Whoa," she breathed in awe. Hesitantly, Eri took a step while clinging tight to Mirio's hand. It took a bit of wobbling and effort before she was able to walk normally, but once she did she was amazed. "I can't wait to show Izuku." It had been a few weeks since the attack. Everyone was fully healed thanks to new technology, and had since returned to school only that week. Everyone refused to utter a word about the incident. Now that it had been a bit, Aizawa needed to have a talk with Todoroki. Finding Todoroki wasn't hard at all. He just went to where Izuku normally was. The couch. Aizawa silently slunk into the room. "Todoroki, can we talk?" Todoroki raised an eyebrow at him and gestured to Izuku who was leaning against him with his eyes half closed. "No." Aizawa sighed. "I wasn't asking." Todoroki opened his mouth to argue, but Aizawa quickly interrupted. "Don't make me restrain you." Todoroki slumped in defeat and carefully slipped out from under Izuku, following Aizawa as they headed to his office. "What do we need to talk about?" Todoroki stood in front of the desk next to the chair as Aizawa sat across from him. "Sit." "No," he countered. "Now what was so important you had to interrupt me for?" Aizawa decided not to point out he hadn't interrupted shit because Todoroki hadn't been doing shit. "I need you to tell me about your past." Todoroki gave a sharp bark of laugh. "No." Aizawa was getting really tired of hearing that word. "You cannot be released from this facility, not that you're any close to be released, mind you, until you share why your past with us." "Guess I'm never leaving then," Because no fucking way. Todoroki, you get to continue being a police in training when you leave here, but you won't get to graduate if you don't tell us? Todoroki narrowed his eyes. You want to know about my past? Fine. My dad's the gang leader, Endeavor. My mom burned me before being killed in front of me for it. My eldest sister is missing, probably dead after standing up to him. My oldest brother joined another gang, and my last brother is dead. Figure the rest out your fucking self. Without waiting for a response, Todoroki stood and stormed out, slamming the door shut behind him with a loud crack. Aizawa was left in his office already detesting the report he'd have to write on why the door had been damaged and the information he'd found. Shinso was sitting on the outside balcony, watching as the sun went down and was striped with beautiful shades of pinks, oranges, and purples. He had been ignoring Denki since the attack after carrying him to safety. Gut-wrenching guilt made him gag every time he saw him, Kaminari's unconscious body filling his mind. Shinso was so lost in his thoughts he didn't notice someone slipping in behind him after locking the inside lock on the door. Hey! Kaminari's quiet voice came, making Shinso jump. What's wrong? Shinso abruptly stood and went to leave only to find the door locked. He sighed and sunk to the ground. No dash. Don't you dare, Kaminari hissed, surprising Shinso at his tone. Why are you avoiding me? I want to know now. Shinso was silent for a minute and Kaminari opened his mouth to lecture him when Shinso spoke. It was so quiet Denki barely heard him. I thought I lost you. It was Kaminari's turn to be stunned. What? I thought I lost you, Shinso repeated. He refused to look at Kaminari, keeping his eyes stuck to the sunset. I was scared. A stray tear managed to crawl down his cheek before he could stop it. Shinso stubbornly wiped it away. Kaminari had his arms wrapped around Shinso before he even knew what he was doing. Don't worry. You couldn't get rid of me if you tried. They sat there until the sun was fully done and the sky was a dark hue, stars prickling in the sky. It was Mina who finally let them inside, noticing Kaminari was missing from their game night. She couldn't help her smile that came over her as she let them in. Kaminari knew he'd never hear the end of it. Todoroki laid in bed, thoughts taking over. He remembered. He had been laying in bed just like he was now, only difference was back then he was in Endeavor's house. Fuyumi had just disappeared when he noticed someone in the yard. Todoroki had to admit he had been surprised to see a spy had made it past the guards, so throwing on a coat he got ready to go out and meet them. He didn't make it past the kitchen before running into him. Endeavor. Todoroki glared at the intimidating man. Where are you going, Shoto? Even his voice was cruel. There was a dash. A fist to the stomach made Todoroki kneel over, coughing as all the breath went out of him. Don't even think about leaving this house, Endeavor snarled, stepping on Todoroki's face. Tears sprung to his eyes at the sharp pain. The door was slammed down. What the fuck are you doing? An unfamiliar voice spat. The pressure of his father's foot disappeared. In front of them stood a green-haired, exhausted-looking boy. You're trespassing, Endeavor hissed. How's you get past security? Todoroki winced. The boy had to have been his age and he doubted he'd make it out alive. No one deserved Endeavor's wrath. I'm with the League, Izuku Midoriya. I got lost during a mission. Izuku flashed Todoroki a quick look and he saw the fear in his eyes. He knew he'd be punished for this, yet he was doing it anyways? To help a stranger like him? It made no sense to Todoroki. I got a call from your boss earlier. He's looking for you. Endeavor seemed admittedly more relaxed now that he knew about the boy. Todoroki realized he must have met him before. Fine. You can wait in the living room with Shoto while I call the League. Endeavor stormed off and Izuku instantly crept down to help Todoroki up. His grip was surprisingly gentle while he helped lead him to the living room and lay him on the couch. Why? Izuku shrugged. We're in the same situation. I couldn't stand around and watch. What are you even doing here? Todoroki wondered. What a strange boy. Izuku looked down. I was running away. Todoroki's eyes widened. Leave. Go. Don't stand around and get caught because of me. Izuku shook his head. I'm not leaving you to get hurt any worse because of me. Todoroki opened his mouth to argue when Endeavor appeared. They're here. Apparently they were looking for you. Izuku very visibly paled, but with Todoroki behind him and Endeavor's eyes suspiciously on him, he followed them to the door where Shigaraki, Toga and Dabi were waiting. Hi dash. He choked out before being yanked outside and thrown into the grass. Where were you? Shigaraki snarled, kicking him in the stomach. All the air left Izuku's lungs and he started to cough. Shigaraki continued kicking Izuku over and over until he was coughing up blood and dry heaving onto the grass. His face was bloodied, eye blackened, neck bruised from the brutal beating. Todoroki had never seen such a beating on another person before and could only watch in horror. Apologies, Endeavor, Shigaraki waved, we'll be going now. Dabi and Toga immediately dropped next to Izuku, each taking one of his arms as they carefully hoisted him up, trying hard not to hurt him any more, and started following behind Shigaraki as he turned to leave, leaving Todoroki behind with Endeavor. Izuku turned just long enough to give Todoroki the smallest of nods before helping take some of his weight and limping along with the two. Todoroki jolted back to reality with a harsh breath. Izuku! Izuku had been back at the beach, just heading back inside when he heard it. Izuku! Instantly he winced and turned to leave before realizing it was Todoroki. He turned to find him fuming behind the doorway as he calmly stormed into the room. Izuku was confused. How did he know he'd snuck out again? Why didn't you tell me? Todoroki's calm demeanor actually scared Izuku at the moment. He definitely wasn't talking about sneaking out. And then it hit him. That day. Izuku froze. Why? Todoroki's voice made Izuku's heart break. It made all the pain when they'd gotten home worth it. It made him glad he had done it. I don't want to talk about it, he numbly signed, turning away. Todoroki opened his mouth to protest, but one look at Izuku's heartbroken face shut him up quickly. Very well, he sighed dejectedly, but still he approached Izuku and wrapped his arms around him tightly. I can wait, he whispered. At school, Aizawa announced the upcoming school police training festival, where they'd show off their skill and compete against other students. Shinso found himself actually looking forward to it. It sounded fun. Not like a normal beating he was used to, he'd get to fight back. The day before it came, Izuku was going to leave only to open the door to a large crowd. He glared at them wordlessly and Class 1A froze to stare. Well, if it isn't the screw-ups, Monomo spat. What the fuck do you want? Katsuki snarled, protectively sliding in front of Izuku. We want to make a proposition. And why would we do that? Todoroki questioned, raising an eyebrow. He stayed tense and ready to fight should Monomo try anything. The teachers had gone ahead of them and it seemed Class 1B had taken advantage of that. Because if you win, we leave you physically alone. No more jumping. Monomo smiled at them innocently, conflicting with his words. And verbally, Shinso broke in. Both or no deal. Wrong, Monomo corrected. Physically only or no deal. And what do you get if you win? Izuku hissed so only Monomo and Katsuki could hear. He paled at his voice before shaking it off with a forced laugh. If we win, then you become our personal slaves. We can do whatever we want to you without consequences. But it's easy to win. All you have to do is win the sports festival. Monomo started to cackle, pausing only for a second to say, unless you're too chicken? Instantly Katsuki went nose to nose with Monomo. You have a deal. Behind him Kirishima groaned and Izuku tried to resist smacking Katsuki. He failed. The day of the sports festival, everyone was nervous. They were gathered in a clearing with all of the classes, every single person determined to win, if not for themselves then for each other. There was too much on the line to not win. Then Katsuki was called to give a speech. Kirishima groaned from the side and Izuku got the distinct feeling everything was about to go horribly wrong. Katsuki grinned as he stepped up to the stage. Notice, Class 1B, that it was me from Class 1A who had been asked up to stage and not you. Consider this an omen. It'll be the same in the results, Class 1A on the stands as winners. All you extras have no fucking chance. But, good luck anyways or whatever. He sent Kirishima a thumbs up as he walked off and Kirishima face-bombed. Izuku figured the good luck anyways or whatever was Kirishima's doing. It was worth a shot, he supposed. The whole stadium burst into boos and yelling as Katsuki joined the others. Kaminari threw an arm around Katsuki's shoulder. I love ya Baku bro, but did you have to say that? Now they all hate us. Katsuki rolled his eyes, shrugging Kaminari's arm off. They needed to know. The first course of the festival was a giant obstacle course. Everyone stood in front of it, squished together, waiting for the start. When the horn sounded, everyone rushed inside, though Class 1A did take the lead, having much more experience with running than anyone else. Class 1B stayed right on their tails. The gate shut after 10 seconds, trapping everyone who hadn't made it over yet on the other side. It was still a good group of people and they groaned at being out so early. The first obstacle were a few people dressed in robber masks with fake dart guns. If you got shot, you were out of the race. Izuku dove and rolled to avoid being shot as he made it through the clearing, others following his lead. Some kid from Class 1B got shot. No one from Class 1A. And then there were skinny ropes above water to climb. Mina was able to do this gracefully, Tsuyu following her example. Shinso struggled the most, not used to such careful footing. Monomo almost toppled over, saving himself last second but putting himself behind in the race. The last course was a glitter bomb minefield. You set one off, you get covered in glitter. The announcements were screaming over the cheering audience, mashing it together to be inaudible. Izuku dove through easily, Todoroki, Shinso and Katsuki right on his tail. Katsuki almost tripped at one point, but jumped out of the way just in time to avoid getting glittered. Izuku was the first person through by a lot. He guessed his training had paid off. And in first we have Izuku Midoriya from Class 1A. Mike roared from the announcements, causing more cheering to go up. Izuku winced from the noise and attention. It was too much. Too many people, too many distractions, too little escape routes. Izuku couldn't focus. His mind was spinning just like the room. He was snapped out of it by Todoroki snapping in front of him. Are you alright? It's time for the cavalry battle. Want to team up? Izuku wordlessly nodded and Shinso joined them from the side with Kaminari. This cool with everyone? They all nodded. Izuku ended up being the one on top, with Shinso on the right side, Todoroki on the left, and Kaminari in front. They all had their bands on, Izuku's being 1,000,000, Kaminari's 500, Todoroki's 800, and Shinso's 650. All big-time numbers. The battle wasn't anything special, with a lot of running, dodging, some climbing from Izuku to get out of reach while his team stayed on the ground, because technically it wasn't against the rules as long as he didn't fall, and a lot of snatching. Being a pickpocket was really coming in handy for Shinso. When the horn blew signaling the end of the match, no one had managed to grab Izuku's band. Shinso had snatched several hundreds worth of points but lost his own, more than making up for it though. Todoroki had grabbed several lower numbers and kept his own, Kaminari not grabbing any, but successfully keeping people away and keeping his own band. They came in first by around 1,030,000 points. They were then released while the final activity would be set up. At that point, everyone from Class 1B was out of the race. Katsuki approached them at the break room, catching them before they could disappear inside. Guess we won, he smirked victoriously. Monomo's cheeks were tinted red. I have eyes, you bastard. I know. You gonna keep your part of the deal? Yes. I honor my word. Katsuki didn't smile. He kept his gaze hard as he stared Monomo down. Good. The kids gathered at their table to celebrate. Jiro, Momo, and a few others hadn't passed the cavalry battle, much to their disappointment. Think of it this way, Kaminari tried. You still beat Class 1B. Shut the fuck up, Jiro hissed. Kaminari ducked his head, cheeks heated. Todoroki turned to focus his attention on Izuku. You fought and won, he awkwardly complimented. He hoped he that had done it okay, at least. Izuku nodded back at him. You too. Todoroki's smile lit up the room for the rest of their meal. Aizawa sat with his hand on his forehead in exasperation. Mike was next to him in the announcement stand, shouting useless stuff into the mic. The whole thing gave him a headache. He wasn't some stupid advertisement, he was a staff member. How did he end up doing this again? A red-headed man caught his attention from the sidelines. Aizawa narrowed his eyes suspiciously. He knew him. How did he know that man? I'll be right back, Aizawa muttered to a screaming Mike, slipping out of the booth. Who was that man? Eri sat in the stands with Mirio, watching the battle play out with widened eyes that glistened with happy tears. Izuku. Izuku was competing. And he had no clue Eri was watching. Todoroki and Shinso were the first two called up to fight. They couldn't resist laughing at the irony of their situation as they met on stage and got ready to fight. So different from the first time they met, yet so similar in the same way. Guess now we'll see who should have won, Todoroki noted. And no punishments for losing, Shinso crowed. Todoroki sent Izuku a quick look while Mike announced the fighters and match number, taking a moment to study the freckled boy. Izuku stood right next to the ring, keeping a close eye on them both, though admittedly his gaze kept sliding over to Todoroki. Both their gazes met and they both turned away just as fast, bright red flush painted on their cheeks. The two looked at each other as the match was called to a start. Todoroki swung forward first, with Shinso meeting him in the middle. Todoroki sent a punch at Shinso's face only for him to dodge and respond with a well-aimed kick that Todoroki jumped back to avoid. Todoroki tried to swing around behind Shinso only for Shinso to twist, refusing to let him get the jump on him. Giving up on that strategy, Todoroki instead opted to send a high kick towards Shinso's stomach, hitting his mark dead on and causing Shinso to collapse to the ground as all the air left his lungs and tears sprung to his eyes, temporarily blurring his vision. Todoroki took the chance to try and slam his foot into Shinso's head. Shinso didn't give him the chance, instead rolling to the side to avoid it before forcing himself upwards and swinging his fist forward, catching Todoroki in the shoulder with enough force to make him stumble backwards. Todoroki regained his footing faster than Shinso had and slammed an elbow into his neck before ducking to slam it into his kneecaps, efficiently making Shinso collapse once again. This went on for a while, a mess of attacks as they continuously jumped at each other, swinging and dodging. Finally the match was ended by Todoroki getting close enough to flip Shinso backwards, making him stumble and take a half a step off of the stage, which at last signaled the end of the match. And Todoroki Shoto is the winner, Mike crowed, biting back his cheers. He's supposed to be staying neutral and sticking to the facts of each match despite it being an incredible fight. Todoroki went over to where Shinso was panting, collapsed on the ground, and offered him a hand, though he was out of breath too. Not bad. Shinso nodded, taking it to gratefully boost himself up. Thanks. Not bad yourself. The two walked off the stage together towards Izuku, who had been watching the whole thing with a tilted head. It made Todoroki's heart melt at the adorableness. Kaminari and Shiro were next on stage, their own fight about to start, while Todoroki and Shinso walked Izuku to their classes section above the stage. I guess you would have won, Shinso hummed thoughtfully. Todoroki shook his head. Nah, different circumstances, different results. What would have happened back at the cage fight is anyone's guess. Shinso sent Todoroki a grateful smile, trying and failing to push the overwhelming punishing thoughts out of his head. They took seats next to each other in the front row, leaving room for Kaminari to sit next to Shinso when he was done his match. Shinso watched the fight Kaminari intently, refusing to take his eyes off of him for even a second as Kaminari dodged over and over, refusing to take a swing. Shiro continued swinging at Kaminari, sending out kicks and trying desperately to punch him using the full force of his body. Kaminari just kept on jumping back or to the side, avoiding all the hit. Finally Kaminari jumped forward and onto Shiro, wrapping his legs tightly around his torso as he leaned his head back and headbutted Shiro as hard as he possibly could. Shiro let out a shriek of pain and Kaminari hissed from the discomfort but released Shiro, letting him stumble to the side and right out of the ring. Kaminari cheered victoriously while Shiro rubbed his aching head. He could feel a bad headache coming on. Mike shouted the results above them and Izuku sent both Shiro and Kaminari a nod of approval. They had good skill after all, the fight had been quite decent. The next fighters up were Mei Hatsum, from some random class, and Ida. With her bright pink hair swinging, Mei stomped onto stage with an arm full of weird devices. Ida looked on in confusion. Is that allowed? These are my babies, all festival approved. Mei beamed, the smile brightening her entire face. Want to test one out? You know, in the name of fairness. Ida shrugged. I appreciate your dedication to fairness in this fight, so I accept your proposition and will test one of your babies, as you put it. Mei grinned. Great! And flung out a small sphere device, tossing it to Ida. Ida easily caught it and flipped it all the way around. How's it work? A small red button caught his attention. It had numbers on it. 5. It changed to a 4. 3, 2, 1. A low hiss came from the device and smoke started to slowly sink out of it. Ida went to drop it only for it to start to expand, wrapping Ida in a tight restraint. What is this? Ida protested, struggling and trying to wiggle out of the tight net. It pressed against him surprisingly comforting but still remained firm enough against Ida's strength, keeping him trapped. Let me out. Mei's smile grew wider, if that was even possible. This is only one of my babies. Want to see more? The crowd stirred in confusion as her voice echoed throughout the stadium, completely overcoming Mike's own voice through the announcements. If you'll direct your attention to the right, you'll see my wonderful contraction. An hour and a half had passed of Mei's lecture and advertising of her babies before she finally finished. Everyone in the audience could only listen in confusion as it had continued. Phew, I'm tired, she announced, easily stepping out of the ring to grab a water bottle. Mike instantly perked up. And we have our winner, Ida Tenya. Match 4, Class 1A. The audience could practically hear his sigh of relief at having the announcements back. Izuku sent Ida a hesitant thumbs up as he walked into their area, unsure if it'd be appreciated or not. Ida didn't full-on glare at him, but he didn't smile either, instead settling with a small nod that would have to be enough for now. Mirio approached to stand with Eri in tow, buying a giant light pink and blue-covered cloud on a stick. Eri stared in awe and confusion as Mirio handed it to her. What is it? Her eyes went wide as she gently tapped it, her fingers sinking into the soft fluffiness of the cotton candy, but when she took her fingers out they felt sticky and had a bit of the fluff stuck to them. It's cotton candy, Mirio explained, amused smile on display. Eri liked his smile. It made her feel safe. She looked down in embarrassment. She wanted to be able to smile like that too, if not for her then for Izuku. What do I do with it? Mirio tried not to look sad as he responded. You eat it. It tastes really good, I'm sure you'll love it. Eri hesitantly took a tiny bite of the cotton candy, licking it with her tongue. Her eyes widened even more and looked as if they'd pop out. It's so good and sweet, she murmured in surprise with a hopeful look at Mirio. Is it all for me? If you want more we can get more too, just wait until after lunch, okay? Eri nodded as she took a bigger bite of the cotton candy, savoring every moment of the soft sensation as it melted in her mouth. It was so good. She had never tasted anything sweeter. Mina and Momo approached the stage, standing across from each other. Momo felt reluctant but determined to win the fight, wishing it wasn't Mina she was fighting. Wishing it wasn't anyone from 1A. That would have made her feel a lot better about it. Mina, on the other hand, was excited to see what Momo had. She had been looking forward to this fight since it was announced. Mina popped the bubblegum she was chewing loudly. You ready? Mina cheered. No hard feelings when I take you down. Momo nodded and bowed her head respectively. I wish you the best of luck, and yes, no hard feelings when you lose. Mina cheered loudly as the announcements came in with a click. For our next match we have our very own Mina Ashido versus Momo Yaozuroa. Mina and Momo slowly circled around each other. Mina being the first to move, doing a spin then turning last second to the right, darting forward to jab Momo between the shoulder blades before she could react. Mina hit her aim dead on and Momo grit her teeth as she jumped backwards a fraction too late, allowing for Mina to sneak her leg out and successfully trip Momo before leaping back to dodge Momo's own fist. Momo swung forward again only to stop mid-swing and copy Mina by kicking her leg out, catching Mina in the stomach. She sucked in a breath desperately as her airway tightened. Nice shot, Mina praised, wheezing quietly. Momo smiled gratefully before jumping back forward at Mina, sending a straight kick to her stomach that Mina gracefully jumped backwards to avoid. Todoroki felt like this was more of a violent dance battle than a fight. Shinso silently thought the same. Mina and Momo continued their little dance around the arena, kicking and diving and jumping. It was surprisingly captivating. When the announcements clicked on to end the fight, everyone was shocked, and their heads swiveled to the girls. It took a moment before a low murmuring started as the audience realized Momo had 1 foot out of line with her back bent backwards from her latest dodge. She sighed in defeat. "That's too bad. You were quite impressive out there." Momo straightened herself and smoothed out her uniform, holding a hand out for Mina to shake. Mina ignored it and wrapped her arms tightly around Momo. "You did fantastic. We should do this again sometime." Momo held a hand over her mouth as she let out a small laugh. "Of course." The 2 girls exited the stage whispering to each other and laughing. "Thus ends this round," Mike yelled. "And on to the next." Izuku's attention snapped back to the stage as Uraraka stood across from Katsuki. This would be interesting. Katsuki and Uraraka stood across from each other as a small breeze pushed their hair to the side. Izuku almost rolled his eyes at the dramatics. "You're going down round cheeks. In your dreams, Bakugo." Uraraka made the first move, running forward and ducking to avoid Katsuki's right hook and hitting him right in the stomach before leaping back. Katsuki reacted by taking his own leap towards her and swinging over and over, throwing fists out. He caught her successfully in the cheek once before she got out of the way. Smoke started to deep around the ring, blurring the audience's vision from the fight. Is that supposed to happen?" Nick's voice rang out. He turned only to find Aizawa gone. The smoke only lasted a few seconds before disappearing into the air. When it cleared, small rocks started flying at Katsuki. He stared in confusion at Uraraka, who had a small pile of rubble next to her feet and a determined look on her face. "Really?" Katsuki asked, not even mad, just dumbfounded. Uraraka shrugged. "They never said no." Uraraka threw another rock and ran at Katsuki as he ducked, sending a well-aimed, high kick at his head. It hit Katsuki dead on, but he responded by flipping her behind him and causing her to crash against the ground. Blood trickled down her cheek, and she gave a small grunt as she forced herself back up. This continued for a while before Katsuki took the obvious lead. Uraraka was beat up and bloodied, but she kept persisting despite her injuries. The audience started to yell. "Who does that to a girl? That's such a villainous move. Not cool, man." Katsuki narrowed his eyes and brushed off their comments easily. Uraraka was swaying on her feet, but forced herself to keep going. She had to keep going. A punch from Katsuki sent Uraraka crashing to the ground once again. This time, she didn't get up. "Can Uraraka get up?" Mike screamed above the yelling. Uraraka twitched, determined to get the fuck up. She shakily got to her feet and took a very weak step forward. She didn't even get to put her foot down before falling once again. This time, she didn't get up, wheezing in breaths of air desperately as tears pricked at her eyes. She lost. And the winner is Katsuki Bakugo. Katsuki kept his face clear as he peeled Uraraka off the ground and cradled her to his chest. He carried her like that all the way to the nurse's station, leaving the audience stunned into a silence. No cheers. No yells. Nothing. Katsuki joined the others in the class area. Kirishima gave him a high five. "Nice fight, bro. That was so manly." Izuku tapped Katsuki 3 times as he walked by him. "Good job." Katsuki allowed himself a soft smile at that before taking a seat with Shiro and Kirishima. Mina sat by Katsuki's legs and gave him an upside-down fist bump. It was break time for the audience and fighters. Todoroki had left to grab a snack and drink for Izuku and him. He'd only been gone a minute when Izuku saw it. Saw him. Endeavor. In a flash he was up and racing after Todoroki. He had to get to him first. Izuku shoved his way through people, causing him to get dirty looks. He didn't care. Izuku ducked into a student-only area, running around a corner and smack into Todoroki's back, literally banging into him and making him stumble forward. Todoroki didn't turn around to face Izuku, keeping his gaze instead firmly on the trash in front of him. "Father!" "Shoto!" The stare-off lasted for several seconds. Enough time for Izuku to skip next to Todoroki protectively and glare at the man. "What the fuck are you doing here?" Izuku spat, venom lacing his words. Todoroki shivered at the tone in surprise. He hadn't known Izuku had the capability of sounding so threatening. I'm here for my son, not that it's any of your business. Scram before you get in my way. This doesn't concern you. Endeavor took a step forward, his large figure overpowering the two boys. Izuku turned to Todoroki with widened, innocent-looking eyes. Did you hear something? For a minute I thought I just heard talking trash. Todoroki let out a loud snort of surprise and amusement. He was learning a lot about Izuku today. I don't believe I did, he responded, playing along. Are you hearing stuff? Should we tell Aizawa? I don't tolerate being ignored, Endeavor growled, clenching his fists as red flushed his cheeks. I don't tolerate abuse, yet here we are, Izuku shrugged nonchalantly. Enough of this. You are coming home with me, and I will be contacting the League to tell them of your behavior. This will not be allowed. Endeavor reached forward to grab Todoroki's arm, making him flinch back. Terror flashed in his eyes. Izuku reacted immediately, smacking Endeavor's hand back with everything he had. No, you listen. You are going to leave without Todoroki. Tell the League they can go fuck themselves. You have no power over us. Izuku's teeth were grinding so hard Todoroki could hear it, making him grab his hand to try and reassure him. It would be okay. Izuku collapsed to the ground before Todoroki could even blink as he stared in horror. A sharp red handprint painted Izuku's cheek. Endeavor had slapped him. That motherfucker. You're dead. Todoroki's face was still stuck in a look of still horror. He said the words so numbly, so chillingly, Endeavor found himself taking a step back in confusion. Todoroki swung towards Endeavor only for him to easily bat him to the side, sending Todoroki crashing into the wall painfully. Izuku tried to sweep his leg under Endeavor to trip him, but it was like kicking concrete. Thought Endeavor did stumble backwards slightly. He raised his hand to bring it down on Izuku again when a growl stopped him. Endeavor! What are you doing here? Aizawa's voice came out cool and composed, though he resisted the urge to take Izuku and shake him. Of course his problem child knew the villain. Whatever this was, Aizawa was sure it was Izuku's doing. I'm here to collect my boy. This doesn't concern you. Endeavor narrowed his eyes as he surveyed the group. Aizawa had his hands on his gun, ready to shoot. Endeavor held up his hands slowly in defeat. I'll walk away. No one has to get hurt. Todoroki stays for now. Understood? Aizawa didn't hesitate. Safety of his kids always came first. Very well. Leave slowly and keep your hands up. He turned to Todoroki and Izuku. Stay behind me. Izuku didn't respond and let his eyes drop to the ground. Todoroki was safe. He let his thoughts go back to the one thing he wanted in life. Aizawa and Todoroki could both tell Izuku was slipping back into his trance. Aizawa sent him a worried glance, and when he looked back up, Endeavor was gone. He turned back to Todoroki and Izuku. I don't know what happened, but one word. Grounded. Ida and Mina were clashing on stage, not that Izuku was paying attention. After walking Todoroki and Izuku back to their class area and calling some backup to patrol around the area, Aizawa reluctantly returned to Mike in the announcement stand. Not before ordering the boys to stay put, or so help me I will personally ensure you're both in charge of all the chores for the next week and you'll lose hoodie privileges. Just for good measure. Ida was racing around the arena, leaving Mina to chase after him as he dodged and ducked over and over again. Todoroki noted Mina practically had no chance against his speed, and sure enough the battle ended with Ida's victory after running Mina around to exhaustion. All Izuku's energy was gone at that point. He couldn't even muster a nod towards their direction as they returned. Kaminari and Kirishima were going up next. Kaminari kept swinging around while Kirishima blocked almost every attack, barely sending his own in return. Kirishima's blocks were repetitive, the same repeating arms crossed in front of him. As Kaminari persisted, Kirishima's blocks eventually started getting slower and slower, until he completely missed the next attack and collapsed to the ground. Bro, you good? Kaminari checked, pausing in his attacks. Kirishima tried to give a thumbs up only for his eyes to roll back as he lost consciousness. Kaminari remained on stage next to him until the medical team came with a rolling cot to take him away. It took a while before Katsuki returned to the stage to go against Ida. He had been healed of most injuries, only a few small bruises remaining. Izuku tuned out most of the battle to stick to his thoughts. His own match was next. It had taken lots of signed begging to get Aizawa to allow him to participate in even one match, though if he won he had permission to move forward. It felt like a year before Katsuki was declared the winner and it was Izuku's turn. He would be going against Todoroki. Izuku tilted his head at the thought. He wouldn't be going full out on this match. He didn't want to hurt Todoroki, not that he knew why. He'd never had trouble hurting an opponent in a battle before, even if he did feel guilty or regret it afterwards. Standing across from each other, all other noises were drowned out. It felt silent, thought the arena felt light. More like a joke than a fight. You ready for this? I've been wondering who would win in a fight. Todoroki let a small smile take over. Izuku nodded once, trying his best to clear his mind. He had to focus. If he went on auto mode, then Todoroki would be paralyzed or dead before he realized what he had done. The second the announcement started the match, they both jumped at each other, punches and kicks flying. Elbows were thrown, flips tossed, dodged and blocks made. It was a mess and no one could tell what was happened. Even Mike was rendered speechless. Izuku had to fight his thoughts that were trying to take over. Again. Kill him. Again. A mindless weapon. Again. Useless. Again. Izuku felt sick. His stomach was turning knots as his training started to take over. Before he knew it, Todoroki was on the ground in front of him with Izuku's hands around his neck. He instantly released and looked down at his hands in horror. Todoroki slid to the ground and started to cough as he sucked in air thankfully. Izuku. Izuku was already running off stage, darting in between stunned people, refusing to touch anyone this time. He was a monster. How could he have done that to Todoroki? His stomach churned as guilt choked him and tears sprung to his eyes. All he was good for was an obedient little weapon. Aizawa shoved his way out of the stand and after Izuku the second he had darted. He hadn't interrupted the fight, believing Todoroki to be in no real danger. Mainly because he couldn't see the dead look in Izuku's eyes that Todoroki could, as he had desperately tried to break free. He didn't blame Izuku at all. He had been struggling the same battle. Aizawa searched desperately for Izuku while a break was called to assess the damage done. To find the missing student. Aizawa felt really close to losing his goddamn mind when he heard the muffled, heartbreaking sobs. They were coming from beneath an abandoned and empty stand. Aizawa crouched down and sat next to the stand. Midoriya? I'm fine, he instantly hissed, but the credibility of that sentence went down as his voice broke in the middle. Aha! Aizawa tiredly rubbed his face. Can you tell me what happened out there? No. Midori dash. No. Midoriya, Aizawa snapped, catching his attention. Izuku put a hand over his mouth to try and muffle his choked sobs. Why couldn't he stop crying? Why was he so useless? I am only here to help you. If you don't want to talk you don't have to, but it only hurts you. So please, help me help you. Aizawa remained silent for a minute while Izuku fought to get his tears under control. My training, he whimpered out. Aizawa could hear the tears and fear in his voice. Come here, Aizawa tried, holding his hands to help him climb out. Izuku did so, reluctantly sliding out from under the cart. His face was red and eyes glossy with tears, cheeks clearly wet. He gave a small sniffle. Aizawa didn't waste a moment before wrapping his arms around the small boy. He tended for only a second before sinking into the warm embrace. Izuku burst into tears once again, unable to stop them now. I'm so helpless. I can never do the right thing at the right moment no matter what I do. He sobbed, and Aizawa got the distinct idea he wasn't talking about the match. I lost everything. Katsuki and Todoroki approached the stage on their turn. Todoroki still felt a little shaken after Izuku had ran off, but he had heard everything just around the corner from Aizawa and Izuku. He'd have to talk to Izuku later, make sure he knew he understood. But for now, Todoroki needed to focus on his fight. Katsuki swung forward with his usual right hook, giving Todoroki the chance to take it and flip him over. Katsuki crashed against the ground with a shout and sent a kick that knocked Todoroki down. Right on top of him. Todoroki and Katsuki jumped off each other and went back to circling the stage, only for Katsuki to freeze, a look of horror taking over his expression. Why was Katsuki staring at him like he had grown 2 heads? Or no, he was staring behind him. Todoroki turned around in confusion to see a horribly beat-up, burned, limping Izuku cradling an arm that was obviously broken and swollen twice its usual size, making his way to the medical tent. Izuku caught Todoroki's eye at the same time and his own widened. Oh shit dash. He started to limp faster but the damage had been done. Todoroki took off for Izuku, signaling the match's end. Everyone was confused, unable to see Izuku from the angle. Katsuki ran right on his tail as Mike called the festival's winner. After sitting there for a while, Izuku finally broke apart from Aizawa. His uninterested eyes were back signaling he had shut down again. Aizawa nodded in understanding. Come back at your own pace, but don't get into any trouble. Capiche? Izuku didn't respond but Aizawa left anyways, praying he had gotten the message. Izuku wrapped his hands around himself as he started to walk, unsure of where he wanted to go or was heading. At least until 2 hands yanked him behind another empty stall and slammed him into the wall. Izuku winced before he could stop it and turned to glare at Endeavor. You will pay for back. He spat. I'm not done with you. Izuku didn't resist as Endeavor smacked him against the wall again, refusing to collapse under the pain. This only enraged Endeavor more. You think this is a joke, you little brat? Grabbing Izuku's arm, Endeavor pushed it against the wall before sending a harsh kick towards it. They both heard the crack and Izuku couldn't stop his groan of pain. Endeavor smiled wickedly. That's what I'm talking about. He grabbed a lighter and flicked it on, pushing it against Izuku's other arm. Have you had enough? Izuku didn't respond, prompting Endeavor to slam his foot on Izuku's, breaking his little bones. Izuku let out another groan but refused to answer. He got slammed against the wall again as Endeavor roared in frustration. You're dead. Now Izuku reacted, dodging the next punch swung towards him only to crash into the wall painfully. He was unable to dodge the next punch hitting dead-on with his face. Aizawa was gonna kill him. Izuku woke up back at UA in his bed. Katsuki, Shinso, and Todoroki were all asleep on the ground next to him, with Aizawa reading a book in the chair. He sent Izuku a look when he saw him awake. What happened to staying out of trouble? For the most part Izuku's injuries were healed, only a few sore bruises remaining. He was disappointed he had missed the crowning of the winner but he brushed it off easily, only too used to the feeling. At least I'm not dead, he signed sheepishly. Todoroki, of fucking course, had chosen that moment to wake up, seeing what Izuku signed just in time. Not fucking yet, you're not, he hissed, gritting his teeth as he stepped forward while pushing his sleeves up. Eri jumped up and down with excitement as they walked into Mirio's work-study building. He led her to a strange box that had 2 sliding doors that opened at the push of a button. He called it an elevator. It made her feel funny as it wiggles and moved but at the moment she didn't care. They were going to find Izuku. Mirio knocked on the door to Night Eye's office sheepishly. Can I come in? Night Eye had already been expecting them from Mirio's previous reports. Yes. Mirio opened the door and Eri bounded in. Where's Aizu? She instantly demanded. I want him now. Mirio gently nudged her. Eri, we're here to locate him. We're so close, just try to hold on a little bit longer, okay? Eri's frown deepened as she reluctantly gave a small nod. She stared up at the tall and lanky man suspiciously. And you won't hurt him? Night Eye sent her a reassuring smile. I won't hurt him. You have my word. After eating lunch, everyone got called to the living room for an announcement. Mike had been banned from giving them after what Izuku had been told was the game incident, and apparently they didn't talk about it. Alright, listen up, Aizawa started. It's our manual break week starting today, so Gran Torino will be taking over for All Might. Izuku mentally cheered. Sirius and Selkie will be taking over for Mike and I as well. Please be on your best behavior for them, and Izuku, just don't. What's Izuku not supposed to do? Todoroki mused. He knows what he's done to warrant that. Aizawa sent Izuku a tired glare and he shrugged sheepishly. Can we come in now? An old man asked, wobbling into the room on his cane. Aizawa sighed. Doesn't matter if you're already in here. The rest of you might as well come in. A tall man with gray hair and a matching younger woman entered the room. Kids, this is Selkie, Sirius, and Gran Torino. Mike and All might have already left, and this is my goodbye. Behave. Aizawa narrowed his eyes dangerously, and the room fell into an awkward silence. Ida broke it. Of course. You can count on us. Katsuki snorted but quickly covered it with a cough as Aizawa turned his glare on him. Good. And Midoriya and Todoroki are grounded all week, he added, before giving a half-assed wave. See you next week? As soon as the door shut behind Aizawa, the kids started yelling and shouting questions at the new temporary staff. Izuku and Todoroki took the chance to sneak from the room, followed by a suspicious Katsuki. Shinso went to follow only for Kaminari to pull him the opposite way to a balcony. Shinso didn't fight it, he loved the balconies. Where are we going? Todoroki questioned once they had made it a good distance from the house. To the beach. Izuku kept walking, only picking up in speed as they went. He was anxious to get as much work done as possible. What beach? Katsuki asked. I've lived here for a while now and have never seen a beach. Izuku stopped as he reached the sand, tossing his shoes to the side as he walked into the dump. Todoroki and Katsuki stared, dumbfounded. That's not a beach, that's a fucking dump, Katsuki spat. I'm cleaning it, Izuku shrugged, bending over to grab a handful of crushed and broken cans. Either help or stay out of my way. Katsuki snorted but nonetheless leaned down to grab a weird door that looked like it could have belonged to a microwave. Todoroki stooped down to do the same. They worked for hours, normal chatter among the three. Todoroki and Katsuki were thrilled Izuku was engaging in conversation with them as they cleaned. For once, Izuku seemed content. At peace. They worked until the sun went down and dark colors striped the sky, even then not stopping until a voice sounded from behind them. What do you think you're doing? The voice was kept lighthearted, but the look on Sirius's face said otherwise. Do you know how worried we were? Fuck off. They had made a major dent in the beach, leaving only about half of it uncleaned. Katsuki wasn't about to stop now. Sirius stalked forward, putting Izuku into a restraint. Instantaneously the boy yanked himself free and flinched backwards while Todoroki and Katsuki snarled and jumped in front, blocking the man's view from him. What do you think you're doing? Todoroki hissed. You had no right, we weren't resisting. You left without telling anyone. And you too were grounded. I'm a staff and adult, you three are the children. You will do as the adults say. Sirius smiled at them as if that fixed everything. Now we need to head back. Please don't cause any more problems. Fuck off, Katsuki snarled. Give me one good reason why we should go with you. I have Aizawa's number on speed dial. Katsuki nodded. Reason accepted, let's go. Todoroki seethed the entire way back, but Izuku kept his arm around Todoroki's, making sure to keep him from doing anything too stupid. Izuku in the meantime was freaking out in his head. What if they didn't let him finish? What if he couldn't sneak away anymore? What if... Izuku, you're muttering, Todoroki whispered, giving him a small nudge. Izuku snapped his mouth shut. It took too little time before they arrived back at UA. Opening the door, they were blasted with loud shouting. Drop it, Kaminari. Don't you dare drop that. Which is it? I may just drop it. Kaminari, that's my favorite guitar. You drop it, you're dead. Katsuki sighed deeply as Selkie and Gran Torino ran past them, only sparing them a glance to check they were back. Kid, give headphones her guitar back, Gran Torino ordered. He looked exasperated. But Dash? Now. Jiro snatched her guitar back as Kaminari pouted, crossing his arms and turning away from everyone. What even is life? Shinso sighed. I wanted to play for Shinso. Kaminari frowned. You don't even know how to play a guitar. Selkie sent Jiro and Kaminari to their rooms before they could cause more damage and turned their attention to the three boys. Where have you been? What were you thinking? Selkie started off on a lecture about all the possible dangers in life while Todoroki held back the urge to bark a sharp laugh. Gran Torino, on the other hand, acted nonchalant about the whole thing. Why'd you leave? Izuku glared at the ground and Katsuki snarled warningly. None of your business. It doesn't matter. You won't be returning to that dump. I'll make sure of it, and I'll make sure Aizawa knows it too, Sirius snapped. Tears pricked at Izuku's wide and panicked eyes. His chest tightened as a panic attack rose. He started sucking in breaths as the room spun, and when Izuku tried to take a step forward, he collapsed to the ground in a hopeless heap. "You can't," he begged, desperation clear in his voice. "Please. Consider it already done," Sirius shrugged. "Sorry kid, it's too dangerous?" "No." Izuku's yell caused the adults to look surprised. "Wasn't this supposed to be the mute kid? You can't do this. It's all I have left." It wasn't a complete lie while it wasn't the full truth. Izuku had Yue now. He had Todoroki. But it wasn't enough. He needed the beach for Eri, he just had to. If they took that away, no one would be able to stop him from ending himself. "Don't do this," Izuku spat quieter. "I'm sorry kid, it's too dangerous dash." Izuku didn't let him finish the rest of his sentence before bolting upstairs. He slammed the door to his room as loud as he could, though he flinched at the noise. Izuku waited only a minute before quietly opening his door and peeking his head out cautiously. The coast was clear. Izuku crept down the hallway into Katsuki's room, slowly sliding onto the balcony. He got the strange feeling of déjà vu. He slid onto the balcony and surveyed the area. A small tree leaned right next to the window. Perfect. It looked a little flimsy, but it would have to work. Izuku carefully crept over to the tree and started shimmying onto it, carefully navigating his way down. He didn't notice the mismatched eyes watching him from outside. Izuku ran, this time the opposite direction of the beach. He had to get away, just for a bit, to clear his head and decide on his next moves. He didn't go too far before finding a small sketchy-looking park. It would have to do for now though. It stood next to a small alleyway that made Izuku nervous, but he didn't have much a choice unless he wanted to be caught so soon. Izuku crawled into the pathetic blue tunnel. It was nice and cool against his skin and he needed to get some rest. First thing in the morning he'd decide what to do. It wouldn't be his first time sleeping in a tunnel. Izuku let his mind slowly drift off. Izuku was jolted awake by loud footsteps approaching. Someone was humming. A shiver went down Izuku's spine as he recognized the tune. "No." Izuku slammed a hand over his mouth. How did he find him? The humming suddenly cut out and Izuku peered out one of the holes on the tunnel. It was hard to see outside because it was basically pitch black aside from a few streetlights that flickered constantly, and even then they were dim. Nomu's eye appeared in the same hole Izuku was staring through, making him scream and jump back, hitting his head hard. Two hands ripped Izuku out of the tunnel and tossed him onto the ground. He went to grab Izuku only for him to roll and jump up, desperate to get away. He couldn't be caught. Izuku forced his mouth to stay shut as Nomu sent a punch to his gut, but not before a whine escaped. Izuku kicked his foot out, but Nomu caught it easily and flipped him over. Izuku collapsed to the ground once again. Nomu started to step over Izuku again. Izuku refused to let Nomu capture him. He would not lose. Izuku jolted up and feigned going to the right, only to last second dart left. He successfully escaped Nomu's reached hands and took off, this time towards the beach. He darted through the beach, past the dumpster, and started through a series of alleyways. He couldn't keep track of all the turns he was making, but slowly the footsteps behind him disappeared until they were gone completely. Only then did Izuku stop to catch his breath. The lights were even dimmer out here, only lighting certain sections of the alley. Izuku slipped into the section that wasn't lit, becoming one with the shadows. He stayed there until he caught his breath, sweat trickling down the side of his face. Two arms wrapped around him, yanking him into the light as Izuku fought and struggling against his captor. "Let go," Izuku snarled. The figure slammed him against the wall and Izuku dropped to the ground coughing up blood. Too many attacks in way too close a time period. Izuku glared upwards at his attacker before freezing in surprise. Stain? Stain stood above Izuku, long knife in hand threateningly. "Your master is looking for you. Tell my master he can fuck right off," Izuku spat back. "Let me go." Stain shook his head, pulling out a vial that Izuku recognized as one of Toga's. "Just relax and go to sleep, little bunny." He went to stick it in his neck as Izuku struggled and screamed for help. The vial got knocked out of his hand, causing them both to swivel around and stare at the newcomer. "Let him go." Todoroki hissed, stepping forward threateningly. And maybe I'll let you live. Izuku gulped at Todoroki's demeanor. Hey Todoroki dash. Don't you dare hey Todoroki me. You are in trouble. Izuku flushed. But dash? Shut the fuck up. Izuku nodded. Shutting the fuck up? Stain watched their exchange with amusement. That's enough kids. It's time for me and Izuku to take our leave. I think you've got this backwards, Todoroki snarled. It's time for me and Izuku to leave so I can beat his sorry ass for being such a stupid motherfucker. Izuku pouted but didn't argue. He had a point. Not that he would ever admit that. Can I just, leave without fear of getting my ass beat any more than it's already been? Izuku pouted from Stain's death grip on him. No. They both hissed at once. Izuku turned away to prove his point. Todoroki swung forward and Stain dodged, keeping his grip tight around Izuku. Izuku groaned as he moved, injuries being pressed against painfully. Careful, he whined as Stain flung him to the side to run at Todoroki. Stain threw a smaller knife at him while still gliding at him with his own large one. Todoroki easily ducked under the first but didn't get up in time before Stain's own knife left a shallow gash in his cheek before being able to jump back. The two continued their dance, leaving Izuku to try and tiptoe away. He'd almost made it out when they both whipped their heads towards him. Corner. Now, Todoroki spit out through clenched teeth. Stain just glared until Izuku reluctantly crawled back into his little corner, pointedly once again turning away from the two with a huff as they continued their fight. Since he was facing the wall, all he could hear was grunts and shouts as the two faced off against each other. At one point Todoroki fell on top of him, making Izuku squeak before jumping off. A off-aim knife sliced Izuku's arm, leaving a trail of blood at one point. Todoroki had smacked Stain in the face for that one. Izuku decided to take the chance to try and scale the wall he sat in front of. He didn't know why he hadn't thought of it before, probably because he had been too busy pouting to think. Peeking at the fight, he saw both Stain and Todoroki fiercely engaged. It would be the perfect chance. Turning to the wall, he made it about halfway to the top before a knife landed right above his head. Izuku froze. Get down. Stain sneered. He held up the needle to show Izuku threateningly. Behave or else. Izuku sulkily noticed how Todoroki didn't say anything to defend him and took the chance to send Izuku a glare of his own. He slid back down the wall slowly while the two watched before sitting crisscrossed on the floor. Happy? Todoroki rolled his eyes before turning back to Stain, ready to swing. Stain pulled his knife back out, their silent temporary truce now over. Izuku refused to watch the fight since it was the only thing he could do to spite them, instead prompting to turn away and twist his fingers. He had started to break that habit, but this was the only fuck you he could give right now. No, it wasn't. Hey! What? They both snarled without looking up from their fight. Fuck you. Izuku ducked to dodge both the knives Todoroki and Stain threw his way. The fight seemed to have lasted forever, yet also over in a flash. Todoroki and Izuku were currently tied up with their arms forced at an awkward angle behind them next to each other, with Stain pacing back and forth while on the phone, angrily hissing curses as no one picked up. Todoroki was covered in scratches and gashes that oozed blood. Stain had his own fair share of injuries, including his own large scratch that rivaled Izuku's on the cheek from where Todoroki had turned a knife on him. You don't have to do this, Dash, Izuku started. Shut up. Stain yelled, frustration taking over. Just shut the fuck up. I've heard that line a million times and I'm not in the mood for it. Well, I was gonna say that you don't have to do this cause it's not a horrible thing to prove you have your own free will, but go off, I guess. Izuku looked away as Stain sent daggers his direction. Izuku dash. Todoroki sighed before turning to Stain in exasperation. So you carry around ropes but no gags or duct tape? Izuku pretended to look hurt. Wow, whose side are you on? I mean, that's just bad planning. What if his victim started screaming and someone was nearby? That's asking to get caught. Izuku nodded in thought. 'Tis true, but not if you do it quickly enough. Stain rubbed his forehead in exhaustion. For love of, the next one of you who talks is getting a knife to the throat? Gladly, Izuku piped up, looking at Stain in excitement. It's been weeks. I'm trying. Grounded, Todoroki muttered beneath his breath, then louder, don't even think about it. What can you do? Izuku shrugged in response. You can stay fucking quiet for once in your goddamn life, please, I'm begging you. I can't fucking focus with all your idiot bumbling. Izuku and Todoroki went silent at Stain's outburst. They remained quiet while Stain continued his pacing and breathed in relief. However, as soon as the phone clicked as the receiver picked up. Oh, thank motherfucking God, Shigaraki, I swear to all might if you don't come get your fucking bunny dash. Oh, thank motherfucking God, Izuku mocked in her exaggerated high-pitched and squeaky voice. Shigaraki, I swear to all might dash. Izuku paused mid-sentence to dodge the knife Stain chucked in his direction before continuing. If you don't come get your dash? Todoroki couldn't stop the chuckle that escaped his mouth before clamping down on his tongue as he looked on in amusement. And frustration. For fuck's sakes, why was he so hard to keep alive? Stain was too busy glaring at Izuku to turn on Todoroki or answer Shigaraki's question. He hadn't even realized Shigaraki had been talking. When he snapped back to the phone, a figure darted into the alleyway and into the shadows. Todoroki and Izuku sent each other a look of confusion but didn't say anything. Stain completely missed the figure. Izuku decided that since the figure was hiding, they were most likely a good guy. He would use the most cliché thing he knew to distract him. So Stain, what's your plan? Stain took a deep breath and closed his eyes, silently counting to 10 in his mind. No. No what? Todoroki questioned. Just no. But dash? Stain threw his hands up. That's it. Shigaraki's going on speaker. That was all it took for Izuku's breath to freeze. No. Please, I'm sorry. Can't I dash? It was Todoroki's turn to freeze at the complete switch in Izuku. I can and I am, Stain hissed, pressing the speaker button on his phone with way more force than necessary. You're on speaker with Izuku and Endeavor's kid. I have a name, Todoroki spat. Don't loop me in with that bastard. Little bunny, a cursed familiar voice cooed. Izuku shivered and tears pricked at his eyes. He tried to open his mouth only to choke on the words he wanted to say miserably. You think you're all smart running away like that, don't you? Izuku clamped his mouth shut and instinctively looked down. I want an answer, Izuku. No. No, sir. Izuku's voice was weak and trembly, barely audible to even Todoroki, who was right next to him on the ground. Yeah, you do. But it's okay, cause when we get you back, Shigaraki paused for effect, we'll make sure you remember your place. Suddenly Izuku was gasping for breath. He couldn't breathe as the room started to spin. He couldn't even gasp out a simple no. Izuku started struggling from where he was tied up. Stain sighed in annoyance and slammed his foot into Izuku's face, causing him to topple to the ground with a gurgled grunt. That was all it took for the figure to jump and smash Stain's phone on the ground, stepping on it to crack and shatter it. Izuku could still hear Shigaraki's yells fading out as the phone slowly got destroyed. He couldn't get himself to look up at the newcomer, though Todoroki had no such restraint. Ida? Stain frowned. Oh, it's you. I remember you, you're that kid I spared forever ago. That fake police's brother. Tensei something. Izuku remained sideways against the ground. His eyes had dulled as he tuned out the world around him. He didn't care. Ida glared at Stain. Let go. Stain raised his knives to his face, slowly licking off Todoroki's blood. Todoroki scrunched up his face. Come and save them then. Ida snarled and flung himself forward, throwing kick after kick. He whipped around Stain's knife as he flung them carelessly. A stray knife landed right in Izuku's arm. Everyone in the clearing froze, but Izuku didn't so much as blink, eyes still half closed. Izuku dash, Todoroki hissed, trying to get his attention. Izuku sent him a quick glance before turning back to the ground. Izuku! Izuku sighed and yanked the knife out of his arm, which was hard with his arms tied, before tossing it to Todoroki. His aura practically screamed a sarcastic happy? Izuku! Todoroki screamed in frustration. For fuck's sakes! Izuku inwardly grinned. Pulling out the knife meant he was more likely to bleed out. Using the distraction, Ida jumped into Stain's back, slamming him into the wall. He pulled his fist back and swung it forward, punching Stain in the face repeatedly until his fists were raw and aching and covered in blood. Stain stumbled backwards and Todoroki stuck his foot out, effectively tripping him. Stain collapsed to the ground with a grunt as he hit his head against the wall. He didn't get back up. Ida hesitantly leaned over him, waving his hand. "He's out cold," Todoroki sighed. "Now untie us so I can beat Izuku's fucking ass." Rubbing his wrist, Todoroki finally sat down after giving Izuku his lecture. Ida had a look of surprise etched on his face that appeared probably somewhere after the first 2 hours. Izuku was untied but sitting on the floor crisscrossed. They were waiting for the police to arrive at the moment, and Todoroki had made Izuku sit down so he wouldn't run, because God forbid he'd find some other way to get into trouble. Their injuries weren't the worst, but they knew they'd certainly be getting questioned about them. Izuku's arm with the stab wound was probably the worst of it. It didn't take long for the police to show up, followed by Gran Torino. He only sighed when he saw the kids as he crossed his arms and waited. "I can explain, Ida started. No, I can't," the 3 boys say in the medical wing as they finished their checkup. Aizawa stood at the door, refusing to take his eye off of them for even a second, tired dad disappointment clear on his face. Izuku still hadn't recovered from Shigaraki, his words repeating over and over again in his head as he stared at nothing. For nothing at all. A strange man came into the room. His nose looked kind of flat and ears almost floppy-like. The chief of police. Izuku was snapped out of his gaze by Todoroki. "And I'm not going to listen to what a mangy mutt has to say about our actions. We did what we were supposed to and all we could in that situation. You should be thanking us for capturing him. Well, you understand why we're keeping this out of the news, correct?" And they lost Izuku again. The next time he snapped too was when Aizawa finally allowed them to leave and Izuku immediately room off. He had something he needed to do. It didn't end up being too hard to find Momo. She was reading on her balcony. Izuku slid in with her, shutting the glass door behind him. "Hey!" A look of shock crossed over her face, not even about him talking. She understood immediately. Izuku gave a slow nod. "It was you." "I knew it," Momo muttered in a daze. "But how? What happened that night?" "Why?" She forced herself to take a deep breath before continuing. "And thank you. I owe you my life." Izuku violently shook his head. "You don't owe me anything. You made my sister dash." His voice broke and tears almost threatened to spill over. "Happy. You made her happy." Momo hummed her own soft tune. Had Eri been there, she would have recognized it as one she had sang to her the night before she was freed. "You don't have to answer my questions if you don't want to," she finally muttered. Izuku shrugged. "No, you've had them long enough. I know what it means to have unanswered questions." Momo nodded and put her book to the side, full attention on Izuku. "It's not like I could have just left you," Izuku sighed, taking a deep breath. "Even if she hadn't asked me, chances are I would have anyways." "And what happened to you after?" Izuku hesitated. "Please, I need to know." Momo looked at him with wide, begging eyes. "A beating. I got my feet broken and burned. Nothing too bad though," Izuku explained nonchalantly. Momo shivered. "I'm sore dash. Don't apologize." Eri flashed in his mind, and this time Izuku couldn't stop the tears from filling his eyes. "Please, I just dash." This time Momo interrupted him by wrapping her arms around him. Izuku flinched before realizing what she was doing, and before he could stop it he burst into tears. A wail made its way from his throat as he clenched his eyes in agony. His heart ached so badly. It hurt, everything hurt. Momo and Izuku sat there for hours until Izuku's cries became empty sobs and his throat was dry and scratchy. When Sirius, Selkie, and Gran Torino took their leave, no one was sorry to see them go. Not after their strict policies, uninformed mistakes, and the ability of telling them to do the exact opposite things. It was almost like it was planned. Aizawa returned early due to the incident, but Mike and All Might had not been informed of it by the chief's orders. Todoroki had been lectured about speaking to adults in between the whole mess. And now exams were coming up. Aizawa had informed them over dinner, as he tended to do. Final exams. "Not gonna lie, it will be difficult," and I disagree with the school's decision to make you all take something so taxing in your situations. Aizawa sighed. But I have no choice. Please remember this is a training school, so it will be physically tiring as well as mentally stressful. It sounded better and better as he went on. Class 1A sat in their homeroom classroom. It was dead silent while everyone worked on their exams. It was the last one of the day and it had been brutal. Izuku hadn't been able to half-ass it after Class 1B had teased them about being a bunch of dumbass. He would prove they weren't by getting the best score because fuck them, that's why. The exams were long and everyone had been split into groups of 2 to go against a teacher. The objective was to capture them. It would be Izuku and Katsuki versus All Might, Shinso and Todoroki versus Aizawa, and etc. Shinso and Todoroki were currently swinging at their teacher, Todoroki going behind while Shinso took the front, less subtle approach. Katsuki, Izuku and All Might were tussling in another area. Izuku was tackling and throwing punches easily at All Might while Katsuki was holding back, feeling more bad about it. Izuku had no such regrets and he would make sure they knew it. You should have been there for her. Izuku sent a solid punch to All Might's face. What about the people you don't save? The ones who need it the most, you never focus on them. It's like they don't even fucking matter to you. Dodging and taking Izuku's rant at the same time wasn't going well for him. He kept getting hit after hit and eventually Katsuki got over his inner battle and then it was both of them versus him. My boy I'm not your boy. Izuku snarled, throwing yet another kick to the stomach. This continued for a while until eventually Katsuki managed to wrap the tap around All Might. Izuku had forgotten about the tape. All he wanted was to get a little revenge and anger out. To make All Might pay for his mistakes. But more than anything he just wanted him to understand what he had done and will do. When the exam was called to an end, Izuku didn't wait around, instead promoting to storm off. He ignored All Might's attempts to congratulate him, practically spitting at the man. Everyone was sore and aching after the exams. All the running, fighting, dodging and capturing had ended up being just as exhausting as they'd imagined, if not more. Returning to school the next day was not fun. Groans could be heard every few seconds and Izuku had been especially off as he stared at nothing all day. All progress he'd made seemingly lost, though Todoroki and Shinso knew that wasn't true from all the ranting Izuku had done to them about All Might in Katsuki's room. Lunch was overwhelming and loud per usual. No one ever liked lunch and no one was prepared for what would happen next as the doors to the cafeteria slammed open. Eri got her location. She got it, she had it. It had taken days for them to locate him due to a mix-up at the hospitals and hotels he'd gone through. The second the address left Mirio's lips, she was gone while ignoring their yells and pleads to come back. She took a detour to lose them, refusing to let them take her away from Aizu or hold her back in any way. She wouldn't let anyone do that ever again. Running was what Eri was best at. Running and hiding. Darting between people, she didn't apologize even as she accidentally shoved a little boy about her age over. She completely ignored the mother's curses. It wasn't long until she reached her destination. Just as she did, a black car swirled right behind her. Mirio came jumping out, followed by Night Eye. Eri, come back. With a horrified squeak, she slammed the doors open and took off running towards the entrance. An alarm went off for half a second before Mirio shut it off with his badge and started trying to make his way through the press who were staring after Eri. Who is that little girl? What's she doing at the police academy? What's your relation to her? Racing into the building, she realized she had no clue where to go. But Eri couldn't stop now. She took off in a random direction, ignoring the yells of the students and even dodging a few attempts to grab her. Running. Izuku the only thing on her mind. Another set of doors caught her interest. It was the biggest she'd seen yet, so she instantly went towards it. Maybe Izuku was in there. Eri slammed the door open and it crashed into the wall. With a loud bang, she froze as every student in the room turned to stare at her. Hey, who's the kid? A voice called out, breaking the silence. Eri took a deep breath and started to make her way through the tables when two unfamiliar hands wrapped around her. They weren't Mirio's soft hands, these were small and rough and uncomfortable. Definitely not Izuku's. Eri didn't hesitate to let out the loudest scream she could. Izuku would find her. She knew it. Everyone froze when the doors slammed open and the muttering started. Izuku couldn't see what was going on when a high-pitched shriek filled the room. Izuku found himself moving before anyone could react, racing towards the scream before freezing right across from it. Involuntarily, tears started to slide down his face as he could only stare with his mouth and eyes wide open. Only for a second before he started to move. Eri spotted him at the exact same time, tears filling her own eyes as she struggled in Monomo's grip. Izuku harshly shoved Monomo off, not holding back any of his strength. Monomo lost his balance and released Eri to flail his arms out as he landed with a thump against the ground. Izuku reached down and scooped Eri in his arms, crouching down to cradle her tightly. He couldn't stop his tears from overflowing. Eri's soft sniffles turned to wails as she hugged her brother tightly. Everyone in the cafeteria stared in shock while Izuku repeated Eri's name desperately. The doors burst open behind him as Mirio and Night Eye ran in, eyes scanning until they landed on the sobbing little girl. Mirio relaxed his shoulders in relief. Night Eye watched with an approving gaze. Eri tightened her grip on Izuku. The urge to smile itched as both their lips, and yet neither of them could muster it up. They were too trapped in the moment, needing each other's embrace and nothing else. Nothing. Todoroki hesitantly stepped up behind them. Izuku. Izuku turned to Todoroki with his eyes happily wide and soft look on his face. Shoto, it's Eri. She's not dead. That was all it took for him to break down sobbing. Todoroki didn't hesitate this time as he leaned down and wrapped his hands around the two. You're back. No one dared interrupt the three huddled on the ground. Kirishima glanced over at Katsuki where he had his own tears falling but a look of clear confusion on his face. Ida had slipped out to grab Aizawa and he came back just as the chattering started to return, this time at a low murmur. What's going on? Aizawa crouched next to the three kids. Who's this? Eri. Izuku nuzzled his face into her shoulder, making Eri squeal and hold on even tighter. It looked to Aizawa even a crowbar wouldn't pry them apart. Midoriya, how about we head to UA and figure things out, okay? Izuku shot his head up and glared at Aizawa challengingly, but not before he saw the absolute terror clear on his face. Eri will be coming, don't worry. We're not going to separate you two. Izuku's shoulders sagged as he instantly relaxed. Todoroki hesitantly backed up off the two and Izuku stood up, still cradling Eri to his chest. All right. His voice felt soft and light, weight gone from his head. Aizawa sent Mike and All Might a text to update them before midnight to get her to help out while he was gone. He had a feeling this would take a while. By the time they reached UA, Eri had passed out in Izuku's arms. He rubbed her back soothingly as they walked inside. A question he was scared to ask burned at his throat while at the same time he knew. He had too. Aizawa, is anyone going to take her away? Aizawa thought about it for a moment. Not away from you, he reassured at the look on the kid's face, but she also can't stay here. She'll probably become my responsibility until you turn 18 and can legally adopt her. Izuku's face brightened. And I'll get to see her every day? Every single day. I think I'll have Mirio babysit her when I'm working. Night Eye had pulled him aside before they left and explained everything to him. But she'll be sleeping at my apartment with Mike? Mirio? He mused, barely enough that Aizawa could hear. Then louder, why are you sharing an apartment with Mike? Isn't it natural to share an apartment with your spouse? Glee lit up Izuku's face without the smile. Why didn't you tell us? So many opportunities missed, he fake wailed, but quietly enough so he wouldn't wake Eri as they headed inside. Izuku sat on the couch so he could get a better and more comfortable grip on her, and she nestled her face into his neck, soft sighs echoing in the room. Aizawa sat across from them. Izuku's eyes still burned from crying. Start talking. One look at Eri was all it took for Izuku to spill everything. Rescuing Momo, his parents' situation, Eri's alliance, the cage fight, and at last, the video. His voice cracked several times on that one and tears threatened to spill once again. This time he didn't let them. Aizawa was stunned that Izuku had been so open about everything but didn't let it show as he just nodded along, mentally recording everything. When he was done, Aizawa didn't say anything, instead prompting to lean forward and carefully wrap Izuku and Eri in a hug. Izuku was more prepared this time and easily sunk into his grip, thankfully. It was all becoming a bit too much anyways, and he was really starting to love the contact. They broke apart just as the front door opened and everyone started to file in. Todoroki went straight to Izuku, Shinso followed by a puppy-like Kaminari right behind. "So, this was your reward?" Shinso questioned. Izuku nodded, gently sliding out from under Eri. "And your punishment?" Another nod. "God, and here I was just desperate not to get beaten," Shinso hissed. Kaminari wrapped his arms around his waist in a pout. "I don't want you to get hurt," he whined. Shinso brushed his hair out of his face and Todoroki and Izuku shared a look. "Get a room." Shinso rolled his eyes but didn't turn away in time before the boys saw the small blush form on his cheeks. Aizawa interrupted them before they could do any more damage. "Meeting." All three boys winced at the yell and footsteps that came running. Soon enough everyone gathered in the living room, not daring to say a word as Izuku fiercely glared, forcing them to stay quiet as to not wake Eri, who was still sleeping peacefully on the couch. "In a few days it's camp?" Aizawa glanced at Izuku to make sure his reaction wasn't horrible. It wasn't. He just turned his gaze to Eri. "Start packing and cope ahead for a week-long training camp. It will be both physically and mentally exhausting, but I believe you guys can do it. That's all." The kids started to disperse but Izuku cleared his throat. "Can Eri come?" Aizawa shook his head. "She'll be staying with Mirio and Mike." He frowned at Izuku's crestfallen face. "You'll be able to call her and it's only a week." Izuku nodded, sitting back down next to Eri on the couch. Todoroki took his own seat at his feet. Everyone was lined up in front of a bus, Eri standing next to Aizawa waving at Izuku. It was time for camp. Izuku had spent the few days trapped up in his room with Todoroki and Eri, telling her everything she'd missed and vice versa. Aizawa allowed her to spend the nights with them until they left for camp, so before falling asleep Todoroki would tell her a story that his older sister had told him as a kid. Cinderella, Beauty and the Beast, Sleeping Beauty, The Seven Dwarves, all stories on woman empowerment that ended with the man dead. Just as Fuyumi told it. Ida was chopping his hands, ordering something that Izuku didn't pay attention to as he waved back to his sister once again. "I'll see you soon," he promised before following the others onto the bus. Naturally Izuku sat next to Todoroki, resting his head on his shoulder immediately. Todoroki didn't complain but turned his face as a soft red colored his cheeks. The bus ride was long but comfortable. Izuku didn't mind it and was sure Shinso didn't either, with Kaminari asleep in his lap as Shinso stroked his hair. At last they made it to their first break stop. Just because the ride wasn't horrible didn't mean they wanted to be in the bus any longer, so everyone clambered out gratefully. Izuku ran to the side of the cliff in front of them, staring at the forest below in awe. It was beautiful. Todoroki followed right behind, wrapping his arms around Izuku's waist. For the first time, there was no flinch. "Isn't it amazing?" Izuku breathed quietly. "I can't wait to tell Eri." Todoroki smiled at the boy's enthusiasm. "Just like you," he mused. Izuku's cheeks flushed. "Todoroki," he whined, playfully nudging his arm. Todoroki opened his mouth to say something when the ground started to rumble. "What's going on?" Before they could finish, the ground collapsed beneath them. Aizawa jumped back just in time, having stayed by the bus, but the class all fell into the sinkhole, right down into the forest. A group of 4 adults went running to the side. "Oh my God, are you all okay?" A woman that Izuku recognized as Pixie Bob shouted down at them. Shock and a bit of horror were clear on everyone's faces as they processed what had just happened. "Yeah, we're just going for a picnic." Izuku spat up at them. Aizawa sighed while Pixie Bob frowned. "Hold on, we're coming down." Ragdoll went to take a step towards the broken ground only for Mandalay to pull her back. "Don't. The ground is still unstable. Doing that might bury the kids alive." Ragdoll froze and all 5 took a cautious step back. "So what do we do?" The final of the group, Tiger, questioned. "Camp's not too far," Izuku called back. "We can walk." Aizawa glared down. "Without supervision?" "Absolutely not." Izuku gave Aizawa a deadbeat look. Well, it's that or be buried alive. Your choice. Everyone could basically hear Aizawa's silent cursing before he grit his teeth in frustration. Fine. Izuku waved them off, already walking away. Let's go. He called back to the others carelessly. Slowly, the other kids started to trickle behind him with Izuku leading the way. It'd be a long walk. The kids dragged themselves into camp, only a few, including Katsuki, Izuku, Todoroki and Shinso, basically sweatless. Everyone else had been at the very least either panting, groaning or limping. Shinso was piggybacking Kaminari, and Shiro was leaning on Katsuki. Aizawa had been anxiously pacing back and forth when they arrived. Finally, he immediately sent them to their cabins to rest and relax while they made dinner, tonight only, as he made really clear. The kids collapsed on their cots and sleeping bags gratefully and without protest. They grudgingly woke up for dinner, Izuku though practically prancing down. He wanted to call Eri, but Aizawa had made him wait until after rest and food. The food was delicious, but Izuku stopped mid-bite to notice a small boy watching them from a distance. He froze when he caught Izuku's gaze and mixed emotions shot through his eyes. Fear, distrust, anger. Izuku knew he had to talk to him. Leaving Todoroki mid-conversation, his eyes furrowed in confusion before spotting the boy. A fucking course, he sighed. Izuku crouched in front of the boy. Hey there. Want to join us? The boy hesitated and Izuku took the chance to try again. What's your name? Kuda cut himself off quickly. Why are you talking to me? He sounded genuinely curious, but he answered Izuku's silent question a second later. It's just, normally the older kids that visit go out of their way to avoid me unless they want me to put in a good word for them. He narrowed his eyes in suspicion. That's not what you're doing, right? Izuku shook his head. He wished he could smile for the boy. If I do anything like that, I'll let you hit me as hard as you can. Really? Promise? Izuku stalked back and forth in front of the bath, Todoroki and Shinso trying to calm him. Asterisk, what if they think I'm disgusting? Asterisk, Izuku signed. Todoroki would have thought his hands would be sore by now from all the furious signing. Everyone has their own scars. They'll understand, Shinso reassured for the 1000th time, though at this point it was sounding more like a threat. Todoroki made a split-second decision and threw Izuku over his shoulder and racing out the door while Izuku froze in confusion. Wait, Todoroki. It was too late though because they were already outside the group bath now. All the boys were relaxing on their own, no one sparing Izuku more than a glance. See? Todoroki said, a bit of smugness evident in his voice. No one is disgusted. Izuku responded by flipping him off and sinking into the hot water, cuddling up with Todoroki when he joined. It had been a peaceful and relaxing bath until Kaminari decided it wasn't enough. Shinso sighed tiredly as Kaminari declared his argument once again. But the view will be so much better from up there. The girls are on the other side. I don't care. I want to watch the sunset. Fucking Kaminari. Shinso cursed loudly while Kaminari started to carelessly climb up the wall. He'd made it quite some ways up before a small rock hit him in the face. Panicking, Kaminari lifted his hands to block his face, taking them off the wall. Time slowed as terror froze the boys before Izuku was moving, desperate to meet Kaminari before the ground did. A young boy's startled scream as Kaminari fell before he toppled over in surprise as well. Izuku switched with Shinso, leaving Kaminari to knock them both to the ground before catching the small boy, cradling him in his arms. Kuda's eyes rolled back, forcing him into unconsciousness. Aizawa. Izuku gently placed Kuda on the couch in Mandalay's living room. She was standing above him and started stroking his hair. Izuku felt a path of jealousy before pushing it off. Poor kid. Izuku paused in his way out. What do you mean? Kuda has had a rough childhood, Mandalay sighed. His parents died from a fight. There was too much destruction and a building buried them alive. Kuda hasn't been the same since. I was surprised he talked to you so openly. Izuku suddenly felt bad for that jealousy. Not knowing what to say, he simply nodded before turning away to find Aizawa. He needed to talk to Eri. The kids were exhausted. They had been working all day, each on their own things. Katsuki was working on punch after punch, Kirishima on constant blocking from Mina's dancing attacks, Momo working on her leading plans with Todoroki, switching out to work on getting crafty, Tsuyu had been doing laps in the water, Siro was practicing knots at the moment after fighting Shinso and Kaminari who were now sparring, Izuku was focused on a little bit of everything but Aizawa actually had him focused on self-control and knowing when to run away. So far he's failed every test. This brutal training continued for 3 days before the first real camp activity would occur. Despite their exhaustion, the kids found themselves really getting into the training as the difference became more and more noticeable. Everyone, excluding the adults, had gathered in the clearing to plan for their charge on Class 1B and split themselves into groups. Izuku took the chance to slip away for a quick call to Eri. Eri? Izuku peered into the phone's camera as it picked up. Aizu, Eri squealed. Izuku gave a muffled snort in surprise. She was wearing little pink cat ears with a matching kawaii sweater and leggings and a green skirt that made it all clash. I thought you had better taste. Izuku chuckled in amusement. I do, she whispered back, but Mike picked these out and I didn't want to be mean. Izuku nodded in understanding. How has your day been? It's been so cool. Mirio told me about the stars and all the cool signs that go along with them. He also told me about candy and something called holidays. Holidays? What are those? Todoroki, who was standing nearby in case Izuku somehow found a way to get himself injured, overheard and frowned. Izuku, holidays. Celebrations you do with your dash? He choked on the last word, family. Todoroki supposed he only knew about this because of Fuyumi and Tuya, or else he'd be as clueless as Izuku and Eri. You're supposed to get presents? Did you hear that, Eri? Izuku nodded at her. Next time the holidays come around, I may get you tons of presents. The glitter in Eri's eyes made Izuku's own shine. Thank you, Aizu. She sang happily. Her mouth formed a thin, relaxed line. Izuku frowned as Uraraka called him over. They were starting. I have to go. I'll call you tonight, okay, Eri? Eri wished they could have talked longer but nodded in agreement. And you'll call me later? She checked just to make sure. Always, Izuku promised. Love you. Love you too. Izuku ended up being sent with a Todoroki. They would be the third group to go in, Katsuki and Kirishima first, Uraraka and Tsuyu second. Conveniently, Kaminari and Shinso would be fourth. When it was Izuku's turn, he excitedly led the way. He'd never been scared in a fun way before and he was excited to see what it would be like. Izuku skipped ahead, leaving Todoroki to have to jog to keep up. Izuku! They were almost all the way through and thoroughly disappointed with how it had gone. No matter how many jump scares and foot-grabbing Class 1B did, it just didn't work. Nothing was as scary as losing his sister, Izuku supposed. A weird fog started to fill the clearing up ahead. Izuku and Todoroki sent each other a wary glance. Something wasn't right. Izuku took off running, pulling Todoroki to keep up. Todoroki didn't complain, just running around. He could feel the danger too. When they made it away from the air they were in a smaller clearing, probably Class 1B's. But the class wasn't there. Izuku and Todoroki froze suspiciously before realizing. They must have regrouped when their scares weren't working. So who did the fog? Tiger and Mandalay were back at camp, standing off against two figures. Spinner and Magna. Who are you? Tiger snarled, arms out and ready to fight. Mandalay had her gun in her hand, pointing it at Spinner who had his own pointed right back at her. Tiger and Mandalay stood right behind a protective wall and Spinner and Magna did the same. It was a training course area after all. None of your business, that's who. Magna hissed. We're here for the kid. Which one? Mandalay spat. We won't let you touch them. Her insides were churning dangerously. Spinner ignored her question, instead shooting the gun causing them both to duck behind the wall as gunfire started. Mandalay started to shoot back but didn't notice Magna sneaking behind them. Tiger did, and jumped at her, swinging his fists out and throwing a kick last second. Magna couldn't dodge in time to avoid the kick but responded with her own punch, hitting him straight in the face. It wasn't long before the two were full on sparring. Aizawa and Dabi found themselves in the same situation, gunless and across from each other. Aizawa resisted the urge to scream and rip out his hair. Let me guess, your whole group is here. Dabi grinned. Yup. And you're here for a student? Aizawa's head tilted dangerously. Yup. A deep breathe. And that student just happens to be Izuku Midoriya. Yup. A growl escaped Aizawa's throat as he threw himself at Dabi. Dabi dodged, but Aizawa kept going, lunging forward, sending attack after attack after attack. Dabi kept dodging before pulling out a small gun and pulling the trigger. Aizawa dodged just in time as fire erupted from the gun. Do you like it? Dabi smirked. This is my flame. Aizawa cursed and wished he had his gun-interfering device. Teaches him for not bringing it, but he had no clue how much he'd truly regret it. Coulda. Izuku was running. He had ditched Todoroki back behind somewhere after realizing the little boy would probably be in the hiding spot he had told Izuku in confidence after waking up from his fall. He spent all his time there. Izuku was sure he'd be there now. He couldn't let the little boy get hurt. It didn't take too long to get there, and just as Izuku swung into the clearing, a tall and very muscular form appeared to be towering over a little cat. No, standing over Coulda. Muscular. Izuku screamed. The word ripped from his throat before he could stop it as he recognized the beast. Muscular whipped around, giant smirk evident on his face. Bunny, he cooed. Izuku shivered. That's not my name. Come home, little bunny, Muscular sang, ignoring Izuku's words. We miss you. Izuku hardened his face and waved at Coulda to sneak away from behind. No. Muscular's eyes narrowed dangerously. No? Oh. Muscular stalked forward until he was gave to face with Izuku. Well, glaring down at him. You want to try again? No. Izuku was prepared to dodge the fist that Muscular threw out, dodging backwards. Coulda took the chance to race towards Izuku, ducking into his arms as tears pricked at his eyes in fear. Izuku clutched him tightly while the small boy trembled in his arms. When I say, run towards the forest and hide. Okay? Izuku leaned down to pretend to hug the boy as he really whispered that in his ear. Coulda gave a shaky nod, so Izuku released him and let him stumble behind. Screw off. Izuku shouted. You're not wanted here. Said Yo Dash. Muscular got a punch to the face before he could finish his sentence as Izuku threw himself at him. He wasn't able to dodge the kick Izuku threw either, though he did dodge when Izuku tried to slam an elbow into his gut. Muscular moved now, grabbing Izuku and throwing him against the cliff. Shigaraki never said we couldn't rough you up a bit, he grinned. Coulda watched as Izuku got beat up with wide eyes, whimpering at each hit. Eventually, Izuku had collapsed to the ground, coughing up blood. Coulda started to panic as Muscular stalked towards him. With a deep, trembling breath, Coulda picked up a small pebble and with all his strength he threw it at Muscular. Then another. And another. Muscular paused and slowly turned around to face Coulda. You little brat Dash. Izuku forced himself up and lunged at Muscular before he could reach Coulda, wrapping his arms around his neck. Muscular slammed Izuku against a wall as he was chocked, but to no avail. Izuku held on until Muscular's grunts of pain were weaker and weaker. Izuku wasn't looking so good himself either. Blood was streaking down his back and face, his lip was busted, eye bruising up, and neck had bruises from where Muscular had choked him. He was sure his stomach was bruised too. Finally Muscular slumped to the ground, and gratefully Izuku slipped off of him, collapsing to the ground in exhaustion. You did good, he whispered as Coulda ran over to check on him. You almost died for me, Dash? Of course. Izuku forced himself to stand and pick up the boy as he burst into tears. You deserve it, Coulda. You're going to grow up to be amazing and dominate whatever you decide to do. Understand? Coulda nodded, grabbing onto Izuku desperately as he wailed. Izuku started to stumble back into the forest. He had to find an adult to protect Coulda. Right now, Izuku was a walking target. Todoroki and Shinso had somehow ended up together when Kaminari had run off from a jump scare and Shinso had gotten hopelessly lost trying to find him. Somehow they were now facing off a villain who was wrapped in one of those crazy tight suits, shooting his gun at them, had crazy crooked teeth and could only mumble, and was winning. Moonfish kept shooting while giving muffled laughs. His bullets were actually more like sharp, long metal teeth. It was incredibly creepy, and Todoroki and Shinso did everything in their power to not even touch it. The two were struggling, though they were both great fighters. It took a while for an opening to finally happen, which Todoroki took immediately, going for Moonfish's legs and promptly knocking him over successfully. Shinso took the chance to kick his face in, kicking it until it had been fully bloodied and was clear Moonfish was out cold. Both boys collapsed to the ground in relief. Izuku was racing through the woods with Kuda now on his back when a strange, homeless-looking man appeared. Oh wait, that was just Aizawa. Izuku and Aizawa stared at each other for a second before Izuku gently passed over Kuda. Watch him. Before Aizawa could respond, Izuku was gone, darting in and out of trees. Aizawa bit back a curse as he cradled Kuda in his arms, carefully to avoid showing him the burned part of his arm where he had reached into the fire to grab the gun which Aizawa now had strapped in his waistband. Uraraka and Tiu were facing a small, blonde bun-haired girl with a strange mask on. Large needles shone in her hands. "Hi," she squealed. "I'm Himiko Toga. I'm looking for someone. Can you help me?" Tsuyu and Uraraka sent each other a look. "Depends," Tsuyu started. "Who are you looking for?" "Aizu, of course." Katsuki and Izuku were racing, Kirishima right on their tails with Kaminari and Shiro as Izuku desperately tried to escape Katsuki. Katsuki managed to catch up just enough to jump on Izuku, knocking him to the ground so the others could catch up. When they arrived, Katsuki had Izuku pinned down. "Where do you think you're going?" he snarled. "I have to go help Dash." "Wrong answer." Katsuki ripped Izuku off the ground and forced him to stand. "You're their fucking target, dumbass. You are going to stay out of sight until this is over. Understand?" "No, Kaken." Izuku let out a whine as Katsuki threw Izuku over his shoulder and started to walk in the opposite direction, ignoring Izuku's protests. They didn't get any far before a small squeak escaped Kaminari. "Ah, Bakugo?" Katsuki grunted. "What, dunce face? You might want to turn around, Dash." Katsuki let out an annoyed sigh before realizing Izuku had gone silent too and he could barely hear Kirishima and Shiro. Whipping around, he turned to stare directly into the barrel of a gun. "Hi there," the tall figure said. He was wearing a white mask so it was impossible to see his facial expression. "I'll be taking that from you." Katsuki released Izuku, gently placing him on the ground before moving in front of him. "Like how you will." Izuku barely let Katsuki finish before darting forward and throwing himself at Compress. Compress dodged swiftly before swinging the gun to Shiro. Now Izuku froze too. "Good boy," Compress cooed. "We don't want anything to happen to your friends now, right?" Tears threatened Izuku's eyes as his mind started to spin dangerously. No. Everyone looked at Izuku in horror as he broke down and started to sob, collapsing on the ground. "Please, I can't do this anymore. I can't. He shook his head violently as tears overflowed and he hiccuped weakly. He was tired, sore, in pain, and a picture of Eri filled his mind. That was all it took for Izuku to suck in a deep breath, wiping the tears away with a sleeve. Izuku forced himself to shakily stand up and meet Compress's gaze head-on, tilting his gaze defiantly. "Kaken, I swear to God if she even has so much as a scratch on her, you are all dead." Katsuki noticeably paled, but not at Izuku's words. "No, Dash. Kaken. I mean it." Izuku's voice took on a hard edge. "Or would you rather he kill us all?" Katsuki went silent and slunk over to Kirishima, Kaminari, and Shiro, who were huddled together violently shivering, probably on the verge of their own panic attacks. He threw an arm over Kaminari, who looked to be in the worst shape of the three. Kirishima tilted his head up defiantly. All three boys could only watch in horror while Compress shoved a handkerchief into Izuku's mouth. Izuku started to try and fight it when he realized what was happening, but Compress calmly pinched his nose shut, forcing him to suck in a giant breath of the drug. It only took an instant before his mind went fuzzy and Izuku slumped over, limp on the ground. Compress just picked him up as though this were a normal anyway routine, guns still pointed at the boys though they were glaring with everything they could. A stray tear escaped Katsuki as they were forced to watch Compress's retreating form. Katsuki was watching a movie. Why was he watching a movie? Why did it look so familiar? He was watching a young, blonde-haired red-eyed boy playing at a park with a green, freckled boy. A young Izuku. Who was the other boy? The two were waving police figures around and racing around the park while a blonde lady watched. Where was Izuku's mom? Katsuki was confused and getting more so as he watched. A green-haired woman eventually did show up, only for Izuku to wince as she dragged him away from the game. The young boy glanced at his mom, who had a worried expression on her face. The boy didn't hesitate to chase after Izuku. The scene switched to a bar. The boy had followed them all that way, and he peered through the window just in time to see the scary lady backhand the 5-year-old. Was Izuku 5 at the time? The boy winced as he watched wide, horrified eyes, unable to move or make a sound. He ended up running all the way back to the park, where he told his mom everything only for her to shake her head. "It's just your imagination," she reassured, but not before he saw the worry in her eyes. Smoke started rising out of the ground. Fire caught on his mom, and Katsuki could only soundlessly watch as his mom slowly burned up in front of him. He couldn't move. And just like that, he was gasping for air, Kirishima rubbing his back. He was back at the clearing. It took a minute to realize what had just happened. Flashback. A memory. Wait, had he been that little boy? Katsuki was snapped from his thoughts by the kids slowly trickling into camp. Some were injured, with hurt or twisted limbs and blood streaming down their faces. Others were unscathed. Aizawa arrived after them all, doing a count as the 4 pussycats arrived. Aizawa paused and counted again. Then a third time. "Where's Midoriya?" Aizawa questioned, eyes big with worry and horror. Part of him already knew, though he wouldn't admit it until it was confirmed. He refused to believe it. "Where's Izuku?" That was all it took. Katsuki burst into wails as he dropped to the ground, clutching his head in pain and fury. Kirishima looked down at the ground in embarrassment, and Kaminari latched onto Shinso for comfort. Todoroki was frozen. He couldn't move, he couldn't breathe. No dash. Izuku woke up in a way too familiar place, on a way too familiar scratchy surface. The couch in the bar. All for one's base. His dad. Izuku shot upwards, trying to move only to find he couldn't. He was chained down by the ankle. But the door was so close. Tears pricked at Izuku's eyes as he suppressed a sob. "Bunny." Shigaraki's voice was like a knife to the heart, and he automatically winced. "Yes, sir?" Izuku's voice was meek and timid, barely audible. "Do you know what you did?" Shigaraki stalked forward, and Izuku could see Toga and Compress behind him. He didn't know where everyone else was, nor did he care. "I ran away." This time Izuku tilted his head upwards defiantly, though it wouldn't last. "And I don't regret it." Shigaraki backhanded Izuku, making him jolt backwards on the couch. He tried to scoot back but could barely reach the floor. "You don't regret it yet?" Shigaraki snarled. He wrapped his hands around Izuku's throat, ignoring his thrashing and muffled protests as he was slowly choked. Panic filled Izuku's head as he choked on nothing. His hands flung to Shigaraki's, desperately trying and failing to pry them off. Right as black dots started to fill Izuku's vision, Shigaraki released him. "Not yet, Bunny. This is gonna be a long night." Todoroki was sneaking into Katsuki's room, Momo, Ida, Uraraka, Shinso and Kirishima all following. They crept in quietly, gently shutting the door behind them. "Bakugo dash," Kirishima started. Katsuki had his eyes shut, but they knew he was awake. Katsuki felt sick. He had failed again, but what he had failed again he didn't know. He couldn't remember. What? None of his usual energy was in the word. Katsuki was tired. He just wanted to sleep. He wanted Izuku back. He wanted his memories. "We're going to save Izuku. Wanna come?" Katsuki frowned and looked up. "That's not fucking funny." "He's not joking," Todoroki interrupted. "Tonight we leave. Meet us outside if you want to go." He hesitated. "We couldn't reach him before, but we can reach him now. Come with us?" Katsuki blinked. "Oh, is that a yes?" Momo asked. "Of fucking course I'm coming. Someone has to protect you, dumbass." A smile lit up Kirishima's face. "Good." Todoroki couldn't stop a small determined smile from crossing his face. Izuku was exhausted. He had been moved to being chained against the wall, forcing him to lay on the ground. He had been dripping blood that was now slowly drying up. Literally every part of him had at least a splatter of it. Bruises would be sure to appear the next morning, and new lash marks covered his back. Izuku couldn't even stand. He was done. Eri kept him alive, but he couldn't do it anymore. Izuku's had enough. He lay there weakly and let them do whatever they wanted to him. He'd stay alive for Eri, but in the meantime, all he could do was beg. Tears streamed down his face as he muttered pleads for mercy. He got none. Sneaking out of his room was easier than expected, and when Katsuki made it outside he saw the others already waiting. What's the plan? Kirishima scratched the back of his head. You Seach, we were kinda hoping you had one dash? Katsuki resisted the urge to strangle the boy. Are you fucking dash? He stopped mid-sentence. Actually, I do. Kirishima beamed. See? I told you he'd know. Shinso gave a slightly impressed nod. Momo smiled in relief. Ida looked exasperated. Without another word, Katsuki started stalking off towards a train station, pausing only for a second to glare at the others. Coming or fucking what? The train ride felt like forever. It was quiet and thoughtful as everyone considered their actions. As they climbed off the train, they walked a good while until they were surrounded by trees. A Bakugo? Are you sure this is the right way? Ida questioned. Shut up, Fries. It's right there. He gestures to a beaten-down bar in front of them, before creeping to the side and waving at them to follow, look of irritation clear on his face. The others didn't hesitate to follow. Besides the building was a small window, and when they peeked in their hearts broke. Ida grabbed Todoroki's arm to keep him from racing in or doing anything stupid. Chained to the wall and slumped against the ground inside, lay Izuku. He was barely moving as Shigaraki continued to kick his stomach, only pausing to let Izuku cough up blood and look up with tears eyes. Please, his raspy voice whispered. Todoroki had to strain to hear it. I'm sorry, I won't misbehave anymore. I'll be good. Shigaraki ignored him and returned to kicking him. Todoroki grit his teeth so hard Uraraka put a hand on his shoulder, trying and failing to be reassuring. That's it. Katsuki hissed, going towards the door when a loud knock filled the clearing. Pizza? A familiar voice shouted before slamming the door down. All might. Izuku glanced up just long enough to roll his eyes at the dramatics. Compress and Magna, who Izuku didn't know was there, along with Toga and Dabi, rushed forward to stand across from All Might. They swung forward, All Might being followed by Gunhead, as the two held them off, trying to get to Izuku. Shigaraki calmly threw Izuku over his shoulder after unchaining him before walking out the back door as though he didn't have a care in the world. Dabi and Toga skipped out behind him while Compress and Magna, with Twice, stayed behind to fight the police. Katsuki's group followed the villains at a distance, creeping being trees and bushes until they arrived at a small clearing where Shigaraki threw Izuku to the ground. Todoroki winced at his pathetic groan of pain. This time, he darted forward before anyone could stop him. Ida facepalmed before following after him. Goddamit, Todoroki. The others reluctantly showed themselves too, silently cursing Todoroki as well. Toga and Dabi once again stood across from them, while Shigaraki pulled out a gun and shoved it against Izuku's temple. Don't move. Izuku whimpered at the feeling of the cool metal and the others froze, breath catching. We can talk this dash, Momo started. Shigaraki shot the gun into Izuku's leg, making him scream with volume he didn't know he had. Todoroki winced and sent Momo a glare who was looking awfully pale. That was a warning shot, Shigaraki announced, moving the gun back to Izuku's head while he sobbed, grabbing at his leg in horror. Now don't. They nodded in agreement, Todoroki raising his hands in surrender. Shigaraki had the gun, after all. A strange tension overtook the air and Izuku forced his sobs to stop though he couldn't control his tears. A dark figure was slowly approaching, and Izuku shrunk in on himself before forcing himself upward and shoving away the wetness on his cheeks with a small sniffle. The man was bald and badly scarred, fire caused most likely. All for one. Father, Izuku spat viciously. Katsuki's eyes widened. Bunny, all for one greeted. It's Deku. It's whatever I want, All for One countered. Izuku winced as he stepped forward threateningly and the gun got pressed harder against his skull. Shut up. Izuku didn't realize he had said it until a loud smack filled the clearing as All for One slapped Izuku, leaving a red handprint on his cheek and getting dried blood all over his hands. Now you've gone and gotten me dirty, he sighed. What a pain. The kick that followed made Izuku painfully roll backwards. Todoroki couldn't stop himself from running forward with a cry and gently crouching next to Izuku, carefully wrapping his arms around his protectively. Leave him alone. Uraraka cried out for Todoroki as he was left wordless. You'd go this far to protect him? All for One mused. Maybe I should tell them about you, Izuku? See how badly they'll want to save you after that. Izuku opened his mouth but only a moan came out, prompting Todoroki to gently tighten his grip around him. Izuku was such an obedient little bunny. All for One, he did what told without question. But when he lost his own little pet Dash, this time Izuku forced his head up, ignoring Todoroki's protests. She's Dash, a cough, my sister. It was all he had the energy to muster out before dropping his head back down. All for One let out a chuckle. Sure. Todoroki sent the others a warning look not to fucking say anything. They got the hint and shut their mouths as All for One continued. He took his punishments when he failed well, and became the perfect weapon. His training was wonderful. If only you could have seen it. He laughed, making the group shudder. Katsuki got the urge to rip the man's heart out with his bare hands. All for One had ducked just in time to avoid getting hit by a bullet before slowly turning around. I was wondering when you'd show, he murmured. Welcome All Might. Izuku felt exhausted. Todoroki was currently running, Ida ahead, Katsuki, Momo, Uraraka, Shinso, Kirishima and Ida right behind. They were leaving the fight behind them, Shinso the only one with any injuries from taking a punch aimed at Todoroki from Shigaraki, aside from Izuku of fucking course. Todoroki was cradling Izuku to his chest, trying to be careful but as he bounced Izuku couldn't stop his groans of pain. His leg was on fire, dripping blood onto Todoroki's suit. Every part of him was aching. When they made it back to the train, Katsuki called the police while Todoroki started to wrap Izuku's leg with a torn-off piece of his shirt. The police arrived quickly enough, Aizawa in the front car. Everyone involuntarily gulped at his bristling anger. What the hell were you all thinking? Aizawa hissed. What is wrong with you all? He closed his eyes for a second before opening them and spotting Izuku, red with a fever, before rushing over to him to access the damage. Get me an ambulance, he ordered to a nearby officer. Now. He sent the others a glare. And get them to you. A day later and Izuku had been all healed up. Aizawa was filling out the final paperwork before Izuku could go home as he bounced his leg impatiently. When the homeless-looking man walked into his room, Izuku practically jumped up, ready to go. Aizawa rolled his eyes but wordlessly led the way to the car. Izuku took a deep breath, already prepared for the oncoming lecture. What made you think it was okay to go after the villains when you knew you were the target? Izuku knew this wasn't a question you were supposed to answer, so he stayed quiet. The entire car ride was one lecture after another and Aizawa cursing out the problem child's bad luck. When they reached UA, Eri was pacing out front. She had been waiting there ever since Izuku hadn't come home, refusing to step anywhere else for even a second. Someone had brought her a blanket and Mike even spent the night with her outside. When she saw Izuku, her eyes lit up and she ran into his waiting arms with a squeal. Aizu! She sang. Izuku froze and tilted his head at her with wide eyes. Eri, you did it, he breathed in awe. Eri tilted her own head back. Did what? A slow but sure smile started to take over Izuku's mouth, making Eri gasp. Aizu, you smiled. Izuku burst out laughing at the strange position his mouth was in. Eri felt her own and beamed. She was smiling too. Aizawa couldn't help his own smile at the two's adorableness. It was gonna give him cavities. That's enough, you two, head on inside. The others are worried, Aizawa ordered. Izuku wrapped Eri in a tight embrace and raced inside. Shoto. Todoroki was waiting by the door, crouched on the floor with his eyes closed. They popped open at Izuku's voice but he froze when he saw the smile. A wide smile took over his own face as he stared lovingly at Izuku. His smile was gorgeous. Without meaning to, he stood and pressed a quick small kiss on Izuku's cheek. Red flushed Izuku's cheeks as he grinned widely, unable to stop. Eri giggled at the two while Aizawa looked on in confusion, having missed the entire thing. Shinso watched the whole thing from the sidelines and couldn't help but glance at where Kaminari was talking with Mina. It was lights-out time and Todoroki had hatched a plan. Silently, he slipped out his door and made his way to Momo's room, effortlessly slipping inside. The problem was that he kept going too far. That's how Aizawa kept catching him. However, if he did this, Momo nodded a good night at him as he opened her balcony, but not before nodding back. He had told her his plan the previous day and she had even helped him plan it all out. Finding the footing to scramble outside the balcony was tricky but doable. Todoroki took a small breath and started to climb. It felt slightly chilly outside but nothing too horrible. Todoroki had felt worse. Todoroki made it to his destination and carefully tapped on Katsuki's window. Him and Izuku had been told the plan the previous day as well so they could prepare. Izuku had snuck into Katsuki's room and was all ready. Katsuki waved a goodbye as the two climbed back down. "Be fucking careful," he hissed. Todoroki nodded. Sure, he hadn't been entirely truthful of their destination, telling the boys they were going to the park, but after the stain incident, and the fact Todoroki was itching for a good night out, he figured a bar would be much better. Once they were on the ground, the two took off running, giggling to each other as they went. They had matching wide smiles, teeth gleaming in the dark. "Shoto, this isn't the right way," Izuku whined for the millionth time. Todoroki almost rolled his eyes. "I told you, we're not going to the park with your tendency to cause trouble. But I wanted to go. We just arrived anyways. Maybe if you'd pay attention to your surroundings, you'd know that." Todoroki had to catch the freckled boy multiple times as he had tripped over his own feet. Izuku perked up and stared at the big bar in front of him, smile forming on his lips before wrapping Todoroki in a tight hug. "Thank you, thank you, thank you," he exclaimed in excitement. "Oh God, it's been forever since I've gotten to get a drink." Todoroki hummed in agreement before passing Izuku his fake ID. It had been hell to get it and keep it with Aizawa around, but he did it. Getting in turned out to be easy and Izuku went straight to the bar to order some shots, Todoroki on his heels. "We'll start with 5. Some hours had passed and both Todoroki and Izuku were completely drunk, Todoroki being fully functional while Izuku was giggling and flopping around everywhere. Todoroki grinned at how adorable Izuku was being. "I want cuddles," Izuku cried, launching himself at Todoroki and cuddling up lovingly to him without warning. Todoroki rested his chin on his head. "Anytime, Izuku. Show you're the best. I love you this much." Izuku held his arms out as long as they could go before frowning and tearing up. Instantly Todoroki was alarmed. "What's wrong?" "I don't love you that much, I love you more than that much, but my hands dash." He sniffled, "Can't reach." Izuku burst into tears, earning some weird looks from other people. Todoroki soothingly rubbed Izuku's back. "It's okay, I know how much you love me." Well, now he did, and it was making his cheeks burn really red. Izuku instantly stopped crying. "Can we go dance now?" A small sign escaped Todoroki. A content sigh. "Of course." Todoroki let Izuku pull him onto the dance floor. They both ended up being horrible dancers while drunk, but they'd never had more fun. Finally, Izuku started to droop and lean against Todoroki exhaustedly. "Ready to go home?" Todoroki cooed, leaning Izuku's head up for a kiss. Izuku kissed him back, hard and on the mouth, taking Todoroki by surprise. Todoroki immediately took him up on that kiss before realizing Izuku was drunk and reluctantly breaking away. Izuku whined, but Todoroki shook his head. "Sorry Izuku, you're drunk. I need to make sure you're sober before we do stuff like that." Izuku sighed dejectedly and cuddled back up into Izuku. "Okay." A voice cleared his throat from behind the two, making them both freeze and slowly turn around. "What the hell are you two doing here?" Aizawa snarled, placing a hand on his forehead as he shut his eyes tightly. "You know what, don't answer that. We're leaving." "No." Todoroki and Izuku didn't bother respond before following Aizawa outside the bar, Izuku leaning heavily against Todoroki and stumbling every few steps. Todoroki wanted to just pick Izuku up, but not with Aizawa's glare on them. Aizawa held the door open for the two to slide in before slamming it shut and getting in front, opening his mouth to start a lecture when Izuku interrupted. "Homeless man," he giggled. "Aizawa the homeless man." Aizawa hissed in frustration. "You're drunk?" Todoroki nodded. "Me too," he offered. Aizawa slammed his head into his horn tiredly before straightening out, stormy look on his face. "Grounded? How long?" Todoroki questioned. "Until you fucking graduate?" Todoroki stopped asking questions after that and let Aizawa rant about all the stupid and dangerous things they'd done that night and what could have gone wrong before warning them to never try something so stupid again. Needless to say, it was a long ride back home. The two boys ended up being grounded for a month, but the time flashed by like nothing as they spent their time playing with Eri and cuddling. Izuku felt the happiest he's ever been. Finally, they regained permission to go out. Izuku made Mike promise to take them all to the park as a reward. It would be Izuku's first time going to the big one with his classmates. Everyone reluctantly filed onto the bus, excluding an excited Izuku and nonchalant Todoroki and Shinso. Everyone took their normal seats. When they arrived, Izuku was easily the first one off the bus. Other kids occupied the park, but Izuku paid them no mind. "Can we go on the swings?" Izuku begged Todoroki, giving him the biggest puppy dog eyes he could. "I suppose?" Izuku had been happily swinging when he spotted Mina and Kirishima. They were hiding in the corner of the park. Kirishima crouched next to Mina as a group of older boys threw rocks at them. Izuku had never really thought much of Mina's pink sickly skin or Kirishima's unnaturally sharp teeth before, and nor did he care. Izuku jumped off the swing, startling Todoroki, and went running towards the boys. He didn't bother give any warning before slamming his fist into the first one's face, catching the three boys by surprise. "Fuck off!" Izuku snarled. "What the hell, man?" The boy who had been punched groaned, tenderly feeling his nose, which was now dripping blood. "Not cool." Izuku let a vicious smile take over. He had learned how to do it thanks to Todoroki, and it had made even him shiver at the intensity of it. "If you think that's not cool, then you better wait until I take your fucking arm and snap it in two. So your choice. Either you run now or you lose an arm. What cha gonna do?" The boys stared at Izuku in horror before scrambling desperately away, horrified with the small boy. "Freak." They spat before fully running off. Izuku wiped the blood on his fist onto his shirt and held out a hand to Kirishima and Mina. "You two okay?" Mina beamed and took his hand, Kirishima right behind her. "Thanks, bro," Kirishima announced as Izuku helped boost them both up. Todoroki watched from the side with an amused smile on his face. They had been at the park about an hour when Izuku noticed eyes watching him. The back of his neck was prickling. Slipping out from cuddling with Todoroki where he was resting with his eyes closed, Izuku cautiously slipped into the side alleyway, not before making sure no one was watching him. He couldn't risk them getting hurt. "Who's there?" Izuku spat, glaring at the dark shadows. "Hi there, bunny," Toga hummed, slipping out from the darkness. "I missed you and wanted to visit." Izuku let his eyes dull over. "Do what you need to and leave." He shut his mind off, already bracing for the pain. Hopefully Toga would take what she wanted and leave him in peace. It wasn't worth a struggle. Toga gave a small sound of glee and jumped onto Izuku, pulling out a sharp long needle attacked to an 4 bag. "Stay still." Izuku winced as she mercilessly plunged the needle into his arm, making him gasp at the sharp pain as she wiggled it around cruelly. Izuku forced himself not to move as he clenched his eyes shut, refusing to look as his blood slowly dripped down the tube. When Toga finally removed the tube, Izuku had been thoroughly drained and was pale and wobbly. Toga laughed at his state. "Ah, is the poor bunny tired? Maybe I should help him sleep." With an excited shriek she leaped forward, sending a kick that slammed Izuku against the wall. Izuku felt too weak to bother fight back or even try and beg for her to stop. He was truly helpless as she kicked him over and over and over. When Toga decided she was done, she took off without a word, barely sending a half-assed wave in his direction, looking forward with a content smile on her face. This smile was different though, insanity behind it and not the good kind. Izuku lay there until he heard Aizawa calling his name. Motherfucker, with all his strength, he forced his arms to start pulling him forward, barely making it just in sight of Aizawa. Aizawa's eyes widened at the sickly sight of Izuku. Izuku, what the hell? Katsuki shouted at the sight of him. You were left alone for 20 fucking minutes. Aizawa scooped Izuku up carefully, checking him over for injuries. Rather than a few still forming bruises, he was surprisingly fine. Just really pale. Why are you pale? Izuku started to cough. His head was spinning too badly to focus on anything, so he shut his eyes tightly. He weakly mustered. Aizawa shut his eyes and slowly counted down from 10 before opening them again. Perfect. Let's get you to Recovery Girl. After dealing with Recovery Girls, Todorokis, and even Shinso's, which had surprised him, lectures, Izuku was finally allowed to leave the infirmity. Kaminari had donated a bit of his blood for an emergency transfer. Eri had stayed waiting outside the medical room for the duration of his time there. She had curled up with a blanket and had fallen asleep during the wait. A small smile found Izuku. He felt giddy just watching her sleeping so peacefully before lifting her up and gently laying her on the couch with a kiss to the head. Sleep well, he murmured. Katsuki leaned against the doorway, watching the whole exchange. He had a hard look on his face. We need to talk. Katsuki ended up dragging Izuku outside where they were currently facing each other. All smiles were gone now as the two watched each other intently. Where the fuck is your sense of survival? Katsuki snarled, breaking the silence. Izuku glared. I'll do anything to protect her. You should know that better than anyone, Kaken. I do, but if you're dead then what's she supposed to do then? You need to think about more than the automatic moment. Katsuki spat the words out viciously, not using the gentle approach he'd originally planned, tossing it out the window. Well, sometimes the automatic moment is what matters the most. Not when it'll end up with you fucking injured or dead. Nothing matters more than she does, Kaken. Nothing. You fucking matter. She's not the only one who would be affected too, you idiot. What about me? Todoroki? Shinso? What about all of us? Izuku went quiet. Oh. I'll do whatever it takes to keep every one of you safe. No one can stop me. I'll stop you. Katsuki threw his hands up in exasperation. For fuck's sakes, you have the survival instincts of a fucking lemming. Izuku shrugged. If that's what it takes. Before Katsuki knew what he was doing, he had launched himself at Izuku, making Izuku dodge backwards and throw his own high kick out. Katsuki ignored the jab to his stomach and jumped on top of Izuku, knocking them both to the ground. The two started to full-on wrestle, until to Izuku's surprise, Katsuki managed to successfully pin Izuku underneath him. Their breaths were ragged and sharp as they panted with exhaustion. Are you gonna dash? He sucked in a breath. Fucking listen now? Izuku glared up at him. Katsuki had his arms on either side, making him unable to move. When it comes to you guys' safety? Never. Katsuki groaned but reluctantly got off of Izuku, giving him a hand to help him up, which Izuku took. Fucking nerd. Go inside before I kill you myself. We're doing fucking what now? Katsuki hissed in response to Aizawa. You going to be spending a bit of time at the mall to stock up on things you need. I will be there to supervise and get groceries. Todoroki raised an eyebrow. And you think this is a good idea? Aizawa blew out some air. Nope. But it's required you all go shopping for yourselves annually, so I don't have a choice. All three of them turned to stare at Izuku, who was braiding Eri's hair. Feeling their gazes, he glanced up in confusion. What did I do this time? Fucking dash. No one wanted to be there as they gathered in one of the little couch areas. They were uncomfortable and overwhelmed and ready to get this over with. Well, who needs what? Izuku questioned as no one moved. I guess I need a lamp, Momo muttered. I'd like a new guitar since fucking Kaminari broke mine, and those stores are right next to each other. I'll go with you, Jiro announced. Kaminari winced beneath her glare. After figuring out what people needed what and splitting into groups, only Todoroki and Izuku were left. Todoroki hesitated. I need to go grab some equipment, will you be okay here for a minute? Izuku gave him a reassuring smile. Of course. Izuku sat on a fountain and hummed as Todoroki walked off. Once he had disappeared out of sight, all humming ceased and Izuku's eyes narrowed. Shigaraki. Shigaraki slunk over from where he had been standing in front of a store. He had a deep red hoodie on, hands in pockets with his shaggy hair almost fully covering his eyes. Bunny. What do you want? Izuku kept his face carefully neutral though he couldn't stop his eyes from dulling and the wince that followed as Shigaraki slid next to him, wrapping a hand around his throat. I want to talk? Izuku got pulled along to a small table in the food court. No one noticed the two boys, too wrapped up in their own lives. Tears were threatening to spill, and Izuku's breath was starting to fail him as he shoved down a threatening panic attack. Now what? He forced out, almost choking on the words. I want to know about Stain. Izuku slumped over in relief. They didn't know about Eri. Yes, sir. Izuku had been in the middle of explaining Stain's attack patterns when Todoroki appeared in front of them, so silently they didn't notice him until he cleared his throat. New friend, Izuku? Todoroki spat through gritted teeth. Izuku smiled sheepishly. A dash. Don't even try, Todoroki cut off with a glare. Shigaraki looked between the two nonchalantly before making a silent decision and standing. Don't worry. I'll be taking my leave now anyways. No one could argue before Shigaraki had slunk off, already gone in the blink of an eye. Izuku gulped before turning to Todoroki who was radiating anger. I can explain dash. The police shut down the mall for the rest of the day and when Izuku was done being questioned, he had to deal with another Aizawa lecture on the way home. It was starting to get ridiculous with how many lectures he was getting. At this point he could tell someone the patterns in the lectures. Eri was waiting outside, per usual, and ran into Izuku's arms when he stepped out of the car. Hey sweetie, Izuku muttered, kissing her head. Aizawa stormed inside, probably still angry with Izuku's inability to answer questions. It took a few days for Todoroki to stop sending him glares and for Aizawa to stop sighing whenever he walked into a room. The next morning as everyone tiredly headed downstairs from Mick's routinely radio blasting, only to walk right into Mirio and Aizawa talking. Mirio turned and gave them all a gigantic smile as they stared in confusion. Izuku came in right at that moment looking around for Eri before glaring up at Aizawa, completely missing Mirio. And where is she? It's a school day, Aizawa sighed. She started preschool today, remember? Izuku grumbled something inaudible as he plopped down before noticing Mirio. Hi. Mirio laughed. Hi Izuku. How have you been settling in? Fine, I suppose. If only he would stop getting in so much trouble, Shinso muttered, earning a swat from Izuku. So what are you doing here? I'm actually volunteering at UA now, so I'll be around a lot more. Mirio exclaimed. Izuku almost grinned but instead a frown took over. Great. One more person to lecture him. Izuku shot upward in the middle of class, breath sucked out from his lungs. Something was wrong. Something was really wrong. Without waiting a moment, Izuku bolted, racing out the door. He left all his stuff behind and his classmates staring in confusion. Todoroki was the only one who reacted in time, jumping up to follow. Izuku shoved past people, desperate to get there. To get to Eri. A sinking feeling was filling his stomach. Something was wrong. Eri's preschool was within running distance from Izuku's school, and with his desperate running it only took about 10 minutes for him to arrive. He slammed the doors open and ran into the class period Eri was supposed to be in. Izuku had memorized her schedule for special cases. Police were scattered throughout the premise, but upon recognizing Izuku they could only look on in pity. Izuku ignored it, thought tears already started pricking at his eyes. He slammed the door to the classroom open, only to see desks tossed everywhere. Kids were wrapped in blankets by officers who were whispering soothing nothings. The teacher was talking to an officer in the corner. Izuku didn't see Eri. Izuku stalked forward before slamming the teacher into the wall as hard as he could. The teacher was a young girl with a black bob and tears already in her eyes. Where? She. That was all it took for the teacher to burst into sobs. Todoroki yanked Izuku off of the woman, eyes widened in realization before wrapping his arms around him. Izuku was frozen. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. No. Involuntarily, the sobs started. Then the empty wails as the reality set in. He turned and clutched onto Todoroki's shirt, who gently rubbed his back as he cried. It was a heartbreaking noise, Izuku's wails. The people left in the room had the respect to turn away and look at the ground in empathy. Izuku cuddled desperately into Todoroki on the couch, who kept rocking him gently, Mirio across from them to keep them from doing anything stupid. Izuku was still sobbing, but with no tears left, it came out empty and dry. His throat burned and eyes were a beady red as he whimpered pathetically. Aizawa slipped into the room and sat next to Izuku cautiously. Midoriya, we need some information. I know this is hard, but it's so we can get her back, I promise. Izuku buried his head into Todoroki's shirt. We have a description, I just need you to tell me if you recognize him, Aizawa coaxed. Izuku shot upwards. Tell me. His voice was emotionless, matching his face. A man with black hair, he was wearing a strange bird-like mask and coat. Overhaul. Izuku didn't hesitate. He glanced at Todoroki, who was glaring intently at Izuku, daring him to try something. Aizawa nodded. Thank you, that's all I needed. He rushed back out of the room to go talk to a detective, leaving a thoughtful and narrowed eye Izuku behind. There was a pause before anyone spoke up. What's on your mind? Todoroki questioned. There was an edge, a warning, to his words. Don't worry about it. Izuku slid up off the couch and walked out of the room. He had a lot to consider. Todoroki didn't hesitate to follow behind Izuku, trapping him before he could reach the stairs. Spill. Izuku glared. No. A sigh escaped Todoroki's lips. Izuku, I'm not going to stop you. Just dash, he groaned. Just let me help you, you stubborn piece of broccoli. Izuku opened his mouth to say something but instead froze in confusion. Broccoli? Not the point here. But no, you're right. Izuku shook his head. You'll only slow me down. I can't allow that. Todoroki raised an eyebrow. Start by telling me what you're planning, he demanded. Izuku and Todoroki stared each other off for several moments. In a last-second decision, Izuku turned around and bolted up the stairs, immediately followed by Todoroki. Izuku! Eri was sitting in class, happily drawing on her paper while the teacher tried desperately to get the kids' attention while they yelled over her and at each other. Aizawa had dropped her off before she got to say goodbye to Izuku, so she decided to make him a picture to make up for it. She had been trying to draw the two of them, but it just wasn't coming out right. Eri frowned down at the paper, willing it to become perfect for her brother. The doors to the classroom slammed open, making Eri wince, and the classroom finally go silent. A miracle in itself. The man had a gun and the teacher instantly got in front of the kids, shoving them backwards and holding her arms out protectively. What do you want? It would have been a lot more intimidating if her voice hadn't cracked in the middle and her eyes didn't look so wobbly. Overhaul's eyes scanned the room until they landed on Eri, who had causally continued on her picture after the teacher had spoken. She was determined to finish it. Overhaul slowly made his way over to the little preoccupied girl, knocking desk after desk and throwing them to the side as he did. A few of the kids burst into tears. Overhaul growled in annoyance. Shut up. At the sound of his voice, Eri's head snapped up, fear taking over her features. She dropped her picture and started to back up in horror. No dash. In a flash, Overhaul grabbed her arm and yanked Eri forward, into his own waiting grip. Eri screamed and started to thrash, just like Izuku had taught her to. Let me go. She cried, as he twisted her arm cruelly, making her shriek in pain. Eri stopped thrashing and tears filled her eyes. Izuku,